Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, July 9th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, and Tamara Nassar. Asa Winstanley is away this week. It's day 1007 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, Iran launches attacks on U.S. military targets in Jordan, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar. This came in retaliation for U.S. airstrikes on dozens of sites in Iran. In recent days, the United States has been escalating threats and violence in West Asia in flagrant violation of the June ceasefire agreement, while presenting itself as the guardian of stability. Writer and analyst Helena Cobban joins us to talk about these latest regional developments and what they tell us about the changing balance of power in the region and globally. Later on in the show, Jon will report on the exchange of fire in the Strait of Hormuz and the status of the ceasefire in South Lebanon. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine and Lebanon. In Gaza, Israel has hunted, targeted, and killed children playing, children collecting water, children in the streets, and children and their families in displacement tent shelters, as well as an aid worker and an elderly man who organized screenings of World Cup games. At least 9 Palestinians were killed in Israeli attacks in Gaza City and Khan Yunis on Wednesday. Israeli soldiers shot and killed a 6-year-old child. According to local reports, the child, Abdurrahman Rafiq Badwan, was playing on the rubble of his family's destroyed home in the Zaytun neighborhood of Gaza City and was shot by Israeli army gunfire. Journalist Nahed Hajjaj filmed Abdurrahman's father mourning over him in the hospital, grieving and kissing his small face. An Israeli strike on a car in the western part of Gaza City killed another person, Khalil Jamal Manna, and wounded at least 2 others. Reporter Ibrahim Saeed recorded footage of the aftermath of the drone strike as crowds of people tried to rescue the wounded. A woman he talks to says that she witnessed shrapnel raining down on people in the street, including a 9-year-old girl who was covered in shattered glass. She says, quote, "For 8 months, no one has batted an eye," referring to Israel's ongoing and unabated slaughter of Palestinians under the guise of a fraudulent ceasefire. Also on Wednesday, 4 Palestinians, including a 10-year-old child, were killed by an Israeli attack on tents sheltering displaced families in the Saada camp south of Khan Yunis, according to the Wafa news agency. Israeli forces fired on an aid worker in southern Gaza, according to the Anadolu news agency. A medical source told Anadolu that Ahmed Nasser Islim was shot in the head while waiting for his truck to be loaded with humanitarian aid. In the port area of Gaza City, Israeli gunboats shot and injured a woman, according to the civil defense. Israeli artillery also shelled eastern and southern areas of the Burej refugee camp in central Gaza, and Israeli military vehicles opened fire toward displacement shelters in the Mawasi area north of Rafah, Anadolu reported. An 8-year-old child, Fadi Al-Dairi, died Wednesday of wounds he sustained from an Israeli drone strike on a civilian vehicle in Gaza City the day before. According to medical sources at Al-Shifa Hospital, Israel targeted the car on Tuesday evening and killed 3 Palestinians, including Fadi's 10-year-old brother, Hamza. Also killed in the attack on the car was Mohammed Fawaz al-Wahidi, the director of public relations for the Egyptian Committee in Gaza, who helped organize public screenings of World Cup matches for displaced families. Israel killed him about an hour before the Egypt-Argentina game. Middle East Eye reported that Wahidi also served as the director of the Office of Muqtars and Community Elders at the committee's Gaza City headquarters. He had been attending a neighborhood reconciliation meeting just before the strike hit the vehicle he was in near the governorate building, according to a spokesperson for the Egyptian Relief Committee. The spokesperson described him as a respected social figure in community reconciliation, known for his tireless efforts to resolve disputes and serve his people. At least 3 other Palestinians were killed in attacks on Tuesday in Khan Yunis, where sources at the Nasser Medical Complex said 1 person was killed and 9 others were wounded after Israeli forces opened fire on the Mawasi displacement area, and another person was killed and 3 others were wounded in an Israeli drone strike in central Khan Yunis. A separate Israeli drone strike killed a Palestinian man, Mohammed Abu Taima, and wounded 5 others, including 4 children, in an attack east of Mawasi, according to the Anadolu news agency. Israeli forces shot and wounded at least 5 Palestinians in a drone strike northwest of Rafah. Earlier in the day, a Palestinian man, Imran Yunus Abu Jarad, was killed and several people were injured when an Israeli drone struck a tent sheltering displaced people near the port of Gaza City. Israeli naval forces detained 7 fishers after intercepting their boats off the central Gaza coast on Tuesday, according to the Union of Fishermen's Committees. On Monday, July 6th, at least 5 Palestinians were killed and more than 24 were injured in Israeli strikes across Gaza. 2 people were killed in an Israeli attack on a displacement tent shelter in the Mawasi area of Khan Yunis, and 2 cars were targeted and bombed by Israeli forces in separate strikes nearby. 3 fishers were injured when an Israeli drone dropped grenades on their boat off the northern coast, and Israel bombed a home in the Tal al-Hawa neighborhood of Gaza City, killing a man and his wife and injuring 6 others. Al Jazeera and local news sources reported that Israeli forces bombed a group of Palestinians at a water desalination station in eastern Gaza City on Sunday, killing 2 people, Ahmed Yahya al-Batsh and Jawhar al-Balawi. Israel killed at least 2 Palestinians on Saturday, according to local reports. Drop Site News said that Hudayfa Hussein al-Hawajri was killed and 4 others were wounded in an Israeli strike on a gathering of people west of the Jabalia camp in northern Gaza. And a man, Mohammed Najib Ashur, was killed and others were wounded in an earlier drone strike on a group of people southeast of Gaza City. Volunteer paramedic and reporter Mohammed Abu Luai filmed paramedics attending to a seriously wounded man in the back of an ambulance, helping the man say his last prayers. Abu Luai then turns the camera around and says, quote, "This is the daily scene in the Gaza Strip. Every day, bombings and massacres. I swear to God, we're exhausted, people. We're exhausted. The world, humanity, do something. We're exhausted." Gaza's civil defense reported on Friday, July 3rd, that an Israeli quadcopter drone targeted 2 children who were filling jugs of water in Gaza City, killing 1 child and wounding the other. A 27-year-old man, Uday Hussein Alouh, was killed in an Israeli drone strike east of Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, also on Friday. The United Nations warned this week that Palestinian families are continuing to be displaced in areas along the so-called Yellow Line in Gaza, as Israeli troop advancement is steadily shrinking the area that families can still stay in. The UN said that just this week, at least 9 families were displaced from a site in southern Gaza, with some saying they fled advancing tanks. Shooting and injuries were also reported nearby. During nearly 3 years of genocide and the seizure and occupation of more than 60% of Gaza's landscape, Israel has turned Gaza into a death camp, denser than Srebrenica, according to Euromed Human Rights Monitor. Geographically and demographically, the rights group warns, quote, "Gaza is now limited to an area about 15% smaller than Srebrenica, but with a population over 50 times larger and a density roughly 60 times higher, all amidst rubble, waste, and a severe lack of basic living conditions. Israel is legitimizing and enforcing a systematic pattern of geographic siege on Gaza, extending beyond a comprehensive blockade to include forcible internal confinement," Euromed adds. They say this traps Palestinians within a small, devastated area under conditions more severe and crowded than those in the Srebrenica enclave before its fall in 1995, when genocide occurred. The Srebrenica genocide serves as a clear historical warning about the deadly impact of besieging civilians and depriving them of protection and essentials for life, particularly when these actions are part of systematic behavior that is a core component of ongoing genocide, as seen in Gaza. Euromed says that on the eve of Srebrenica's fall in 1995, nearly 40,000 people were besieged within roughly 150 square kilometers. Meanwhile, the remaining habitable area of Gaza has shrunk to just about 128 square kilometers, with far more people trapped and besieged inside. Recent news about the Israeli government's plans to lure Palestinians into concentration camps in the southern ruins of Rafah, Euromed says, are systematic and dehumanizing coercive measures, quote, deliberately designed to force residents into a stark choice, either face physical extermination or be forced out of their homeland. This is not a voluntary decision, but a compulsory condition for survival, highlighting the Gaza Strip situation as a well-documented example of mass deportation and forcible transfer in modern legal history. All states must implement prompt and effective punitive actions against Israel instead of merely issuing condemnation statements or broad calls, Euromed states. They add, quote, this includes applying diplomatic, economic, and military sanctions, suspending any agreements, privileges, or cooperation that enable ongoing crimes or provide political cover, enforcing a comprehensive embargo on the supply, transfer, purchase, or import of weapons, munitions, equipment, and military and security technology, freezing the assets of involved Israeli officials, and imposing travel bans on them. Maintaining normal relations with a state that commits genocide and forced displacement, or providing it with weapons, political, and economic support, can be seen as contributing to the ongoing unlawful situation. This may also violate states' obligations to prevent and stop the crime and to avoid aiding or assisting in its commission. Dr. Hussam Abu Sofia's condition inside an Israeli torture prison is worsening, according to his lawyers. The pediatrician and director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia was abducted by Israeli soldiers in December 2024 and has remained in Israeli administrative detention ever since, without charge or trial, and recently in solitary confinement. He has endured physical and psychological torture and abuse ever since his abduction and detention. Dr. Abu Sofia's attorney, Nasser Oda, along with Physicians for Human Rights Israel, PHRI, said on July 4th that Dr. Abu Sofia was brought to a meeting with Oda on July 2nd. He was shackled by his hands and feet and accompanied by masked prison guards. He displayed fresh, severe injuries to his head, around his eyes, and on his ears and neck, to the extent that his lawyer initially struggled to recognize him, PHRI stated. During the visit, Dr. Abu Sofia experienced difficulty breathing and speaking continuously. He appeared extremely weak, struggled to sit upright without falling, and on several occasions seemed on the verge of losing consciousness. His attorney noted that he appeared frightened, exhibited severe psychological distress, and was reluctant to speak freely due to fear of being targeted. Based on these observations, Oda concluded that Dr. Abu Sofia's life is in immediate danger. Dr. Abu Sofia reported to his attorney that shortly after his Supreme Court appeal hearing, which took place last month, while he was held in solitary confinement at 𝐓𝐡𝐞 prison, 4 or 5 prison guards entered his cell and assaulted him with a hammer and batons, inflicting injuries across his body. He further said that since his transfer to the Raqqa facility on June 24th, he's been subjected to daily beatings, resulting in several instances of loss of consciousness, but without receiving appropriate medical treatment. He expressed grave fear for his life, stating, quote, "This is the last time you will see me. They brought me here to kill me. I don't see myself surviving. This is the end." Nasser Oda and PHRI appealed to Israel's Attorney General, demanding his transfer, an independent medical examination, and an urgent judicial visit. Israel's High Court had earlier ruled that the state must submit its response to a petition, to a petition filed by PHRI seeking the release of Abu Safiya and 13 other Palestinian doctors from Gaza who are being held in administrative detention. On Wednesday, July 8th, PHRI said that in response, the state claims that Dr. Abu Safiya has been examined by medical personnel several times since being transferred to the underground Roqayah detention facility. However, PHRI says the state does not explain why those examinations were necessary, what their findings were, or how they are consistent with its claim that his life is not in danger. The response also does not address the serious allegations detailed in the sworn affidavit of Dr. Abu Safiya's lawyer, including severe injuries, repeated loss of consciousness, and a serious concern for his life. At the same time, the state asked the court to dismiss, without a hearing, the petition by Physicians for Human Rights Israel seeking the release of the doctors from Gaza who are being held in Israel without charge. Furthermore, Euromed Human Rights Monitor said this week that it received credible reports that Dr. Marwan Al-Hams is enduring repeated torture and abuse at an Israeli interrogation center. His health is also deteriorating significantly, and he had a severe heart attack, prompting serious concerns for his life. On July 21st, 2025, Al-Hams was kidnapped in the Mawasi area of Rafah by an armed group dressed in civilian clothes. They opened fire, wounding him in the leg, and caused the death of photojournalist Tamer Al-Zanin. 2 others were injured, one a journalist and the other a Ministry of Health employee. It was later revealed that Al-Hams was held at an Israeli interrogation center, Euromed says. The manner in which Al-Hams was abducted, followed by his continued detention in an Israeli interrogation center without a clear legal basis being declared or basic defense guarantees being provided, including informing him of the reasons for his detention, enabling genuine contact with his lawyer, and subjecting his case to effective judicial review, strips his detention of legal legitimacy and renders it arbitrary, the group explains. Withholding detailed information about his legal status, detention conditions, and health, as well as denying him proper communication with his lawyer and family, increases the risk to his life and safety, especially considering reports of his worsening health and exposure to torture. Both Hussam Abu Safiya and Marwan Al-Hams are subjected to a consistent pattern of targeting Palestinian medical personnel in Gaza. This includes killings, arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearances, torture, ill treatment, and denial of medical care, Euromed stated. Turning to the occupied West Bank, Israeli soldiers blocked a Palestinian family from crossing a checkpoint west of Ramallah on July 5th, leading to the preventable death of a 4-month-old baby, Ahmad Maruf Zaid, who had a critical medical condition. A Palestinian ambulance was waiting for the baby on the other side of the checkpoint in order to transfer him to a nearby hospital. Leila Ghanem, the governor of Ramallah and El Bire, said Israeli soldiers fired tear gas to stop Palestinians trying to pass through the checkpoint at the entrance to the village of Deir Ammar, Al Jazeera reported. Ghanem added that what happened to Ahmad, the family's only son, was a stain on the conscience of humanity and part of an Israeli policy that aims to obstruct Palestinians' freedom of movement and access to health care in violation of fundamental rights. That same day, Israeli forces shot dead a 16-year-old boy in the Kalandia refugee camp near Ramallah, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Walid Abu Sneina was on the roof of a house when he was shot in the head by an Israeli sniper. 2 other boys, both aged 14, were wounded in the attack on Sunday, both of them shot in the lower limbs. During the same raid into Kalandia, an Israeli border police officer was captured on security video throwing a stun grenade into a car carrying young Palestinians. The footage from Sunday shows an officer approaching the car and shouting at the people inside. After a brief exchange, he reaches for his belt, grabs a stun grenade, and throws it through the open door, which he pushes shut as the driver tries to escape. The officer is heard shouting, "Shut your mouth. Who are you talking to like that?" Moments later, the grenade detonates, filling the area with smoke. The two passengers scramble out through the opposite side of the vehicle, and the officer appears to fire his rifle as they duck for cover. The human rights group B'Tselem said that all those who were in the car survived. In the town of Yatta, near Hebron, or Khalil, on July 7th, Israeli forces demolished a 200-square-meter home belonging to a family of 9 and another house belonging to a family of 5, and vandalized and destroyed a water well. 4 other homes were demolished by Israeli forces on Tuesday. In the central West Bank, Israeli forces demolished 2 homes under construction in the village of Shukba, west of Ramallah, after storming the area with military bulldozers, claiming the buildings lacked permits. The Shukba village council head Khalaf Qadah told the Anadolu news agency that, quote, Israeli soldiers fired stun grenades at Palestinians during the demolition to keep them away from the site, and that the demolition was the 25th carried out by Israeli forces in the town since the start of the year. Settler attacks on Palestinians have continued to escalate, with the full backing and encouragement from Israeli lawmakers. In the early morning hours of July 6th, dozens of Israeli settlers attacked the village of 𝐓𝐡𝐞. Journalist Jasper Nathaniel documented the attack, saying that at 1 a.m., quote, maybe 30 settlers, some with machine guns, invaded the village, trying to push the fence back and plant Israeli flags. Throwing chairs, poles, razor wire, army arrived to do absolutely nothing. Settlers carried out another pogrom on the village on July 7th. Nathaniel posted these photos and said, quote, really brutal assault on 𝐓𝐡𝐞 just now. These 2 guys, among many others, both punched and kicked me repeatedly, assaulted a 78-year-old activist, threw a small woman to the ground. Second guy had a pistol and somebody showed up with a machine gun after. Army showed up when it was over. Settlers told them to detain me, which they did before leaving without a word. A local elderly woman is being rushed to the hospital. We're afraid they're coming back tonight. They are getting more violent every day and will kill somebody soon without intervention from the United States Embassy. In Lebanon, Israeli attacks have not stopped across the south, with drone strikes, bombings, artillery shellings, and the destruction of entire villages being carried out daily, despite the so-called ceasefire. According to the country's health ministry, more than 4,300 people have been killed and more than 12,200 wounded since Israel escalated its attacks on March 2nd. For more on the situation on the ground in Lebanon, our contributor Roqayah Chamseddine filed this report for the Electronic Intifada on Wednesday evening.
This is Roqayah Chamseddine reporting for the Electronic Intifada. Despite the highly publicized U.S. brokered framework agreement signed on June 26, Israel continues its systematic campaign of aggression against sovereign Lebanese territory. Over the last several days, the Israeli military has intensified cross-border attacks, laying bare the hollow reality of U.S.-mediated ceasefires that serve only to shield Israeli war crimes while offering zero protection to the people of Lebanon. In the latest wave of attacks, Israeli drone strikes and artillery shelling heavily targeted several towns across southern Lebanon. On July 6, Israeli forces carried out a drone strike on a civilian vehicle near Nabatiyah al-Fawqa, killing 4 people instantly. Among them was Esperanza Ghandour, a devoted educator and the principal of Yusuf Shammoun Public School. Esperanza had returned to the area simply to check on repairs to her home, following months of forced displacement. Instead, She was targeted alongside her elderly mother, a domestic worker, and their driver as they traveled back from the residence. Further south, the outskirts of Qantara were subjected to intense artillery shelling, while an Israeli drone dropped ordnance directly into the town of Mansouri in the district of Sur. Furthermore, Israeli military forces carried out controlled demolitions and heavy explosions inside the border towns of Aydarun, Kunin, Huna, and 𝐓𝐴𝐻𝐿, intentionally destroying residential infrastructure in a transparent attempt to render the border region completely uninhabitable. According to the latest figures from the Lebanese Health Ministry, the cumulative death toll from this phase of Israeli aggression since the 2nd of March has now surged to 4,303, with more than 12,200 others injured. The relentless Israeli attacks are accompanied by non-stop invasive drone flights over South Lebanon and parts of Beirut and its southern suburbs. As the mainstream media echo the Trump administration's empty rhetoric about a security agreement, the reality on the ground remains an ongoing and violent Israeli occupation. Tens of thousands of residents face indefinite forced displacement from vast swaths of southern Lebanon, where the cost of building damage alone has already surpassed $1.3 billion. The Lebanese resistance group Hezbollah maintains that Israeli forces are actively violating the so-called truce in order to enforce a permanent military occupation of South Lebanon, proving once again that Israel has no intention of withdrawing from Lebanese soil and that they will continue to face sustained and unyielding local resistance.
That was Roqayah Chamseddine reporting for the Electronic Intifada from Lebanon on Wednesday. We've published many features in the last week, but today we're highlighting Everywhere We Went, The Screens Were Dark by Ahmad Shawish, writing from Gaza. On June 15th, I was walking home after a long day of work, the batteries on my devices fully charged, ready to watch the Egypt versus Belgium ready to watch the Egypt versus Belgium match that night, the 5th night of the World Cup. I walked through the pitch-black streets of Nuseirat camp in central Gaza, past families sitting outside their homes, catching a bit of fresh air, and past dark buildings and shops when I saw unusually bright lights and the edges of what seemed to be a large crowd of people. Even though it wasn't my usual route, I took a detour to see what was happening. I soon heard loud cheers and spotted Egyptian flags waving through the air. A huge crowd of hundreds of people was before me, and everyone's eyes were transfixed high above, where a massive screen had been mounted on a billboard. Necks were tilted back and craned upward, the light from the Egypt versus Belgium match shining down on the crowd. I made my way toward the center of the crowd and stood shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of boys and young men, young children perched on shoulders, who had gathered at this commercial crossroads to watch the game. The crowds had taken over the street. It was standing room only, everyone mesmerized by the game. It looked as if all other activities in the neighborhood had been entirely suspended, as if all the residents had stopped their lives to watch the match under the open night sky. I looked around and was pleased to spot the faces of friends and neighbors looking happy and excited. The entire street erupted in cheers, a deafening roar, when Egypt scored the first goal of the match. The scene turned into pure, unfiltered joy. Complete strangers jumped and hugged. The crowd cheered with an intensity that mirrored exactly how we would celebrate if our own Palestinian national team were on that pitch. Egypt is our neighbor, our brother country, and there is a deep bond of love and connection between us, said my neighbor Ahmed Wael Dokan, 25, who was in the crowd that night. Watching the Egyptian national team on the world stage feels like a victory for us too. It's an Arab team reaching the World Cup, and we want to see them go as high as possible. Football is not just a game in Gaza. It is a lifeline to the world outside our borders. Football is among the few outlets we have in Gaza to blow off steam, to restore a sense of normalcy to our lives that the Israeli genocide has made impossible. We are cut off from the world by the Israeli siege, and we live in a reality that is heavy with burdens and struggle. We wait in line for hours to get a mere 2 or 3 gallons of water, and then wait in line for hours for bread that is barely worth the calories expended to obtain it, all while knowing that tomorrow we have to repeat the same draining routine. A 90-minute football game is a vital release. Playing and watching football has been at the center of my life since childhood. I played every hour of my free time, and I spent my school vacations training with the local club, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 as a striker. My father didn't support this pursuit. He reminded me that we live in Gaza, where thousands of talented players have been unable to reach the highest levels of the sport because of restrictions, travel, and otherwise imposed by the occupation. Dedicating so much time to football is a waste, he once said. You have to focus on your education. It is the only weapon we have. My friends and I used to watch games at 𝐓𝐡𝐞, a big cafe on the beach in Gaza City. The game would be broadcast on a large hanging screen, attracting huge viewing crowds and giving you the sense that you were really at the stadium. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Cafe is now destroyed, and the simple luxury of planning a match night entails much more than choosing a spot to watch and showing up. It has turned into a complicated mission of survival. Back under the big screen in Nuseirat, the energetic cheering came to a halt as Belgium scored a point, tying with Egypt. Hands gripped the backs of heads, and an anxious, disappointed silence seemed to settle over the crowd. Our eyes remained fixed to the screen, hoping that the Egyptian players would find their footing and strike back, or at least hold the draw. Every near miss by the Belgian strikers made the entire crowd flinch. The match ended in a draw, and I felt disappointed. Egypt's performance had been far superior to Belgium's, but I also felt optimistic since Belgium was the toughest opponent of the group, meaning Egypt had a strong chance of winning the coming matches. Yet the moment the referee blew the final whistle, the spell of the screen was broken. The heat of the summer night, the lack of electricity, were reminders of the struggles that awaited me the next day. In Gaza, finding a way to cheer together isn't a waste of time. It is how we remind ourselves that our humanity still exists in spite of the occupation. Those are excerpts from Everywhere We Went, the Screens Were Dark by Ahmed Shawish. Ahmed is an engineering student, journalist, and an activist based in Gaza. You can read more on electronicintifada.net. And now, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and reclamation across Palestine and around the world. In the northern Gaza city of Beit Lahia, close to Israel's so-called Yellow Line, a group of farmers from the Thamra collective are returning to work their land and provide food to their community. Their project, they say, addresses food insecurity and promotes resilience through sustainable agricultural practices and community-driven efforts. Ahmed Tambura is a farmer with the Thamra collective and says in a video, quote, "Our grandparents originally planted here. My grandfather and father are farmers. We returned to farming. We are near the Yellow Line, just 1 kilometer away. We face the danger of stray bullets. We work with our hands. We've worked here on this land for the last 30 days. If you ask anyone what this land looked like before, they'll tell you we performed miracles on this land. There were hills here and rubble. I feel inner peace in my country and my land. My plants are a blessing. What I have is enough. We won't be rich. One can only feel peace in their country, to stay in one's area and land, because the land is precious. Land is the most precious thing."
زار أحمد مجدي بشير طنبورة من سكان بيت لاهيا منطقة أصلان. كان أجدادي يزرعوا سيدي وأبوي هم مزارعين في الأساس. جددنا إنه رجعنا للزراعة. والله إحنا يعني قريبين عن الخط، يمكن الخط الأصفر مش بعيد عنا كيلو بالضبط. بنواجه له مخاطر الإطلاق الطايشة. فدينا والله فدينا، يعني تعبنا قعدنا بالضبط نشتغل فيها هذه 30 يوم مسكرات. أي واحد في المنطقة يعني لو بدك تسأليه كيف كانت هذا الأرض بقول لك هذول يعني صنعوا المعجزات بالأرض هذه. أنا كانت جبال كمان، غير الرضم اللي شلنا. مرتاح نفسيا أنا في بلدي وفي أرضي وفي خضرتي، نعمة قد ما فيها مكفيها. إحنا بدناش نغنى، بس لقمة أولادنا نجيب. فيش الواحد برتاحش إلا ببلده يعني، والله بس الواحد يضل في منطقته في أرضه، لأنه الأرض غالية والله. الأرض أغلى شيء يعني.
That's videos from the Thamra Collective. And that's it from the for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague, Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Ali. Hi, Ali. Hi, Nora. I know I'm looking at myself, so I'm greeting myself. I can see myself on the screen.
I like that.
I was listening so intensely to you that last clip that I don't know where I am.
Yeah.
But,
it's transportative.
I know.
That's a word.
But, hi, Nora. It's good to see you, and it's good to see everyone here in the chat, everyone watching live, and we're always so grateful to you for being here for another week and another very difficult week in Gaza. And as I was watching you talking about Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya and Dr. Marwan al-Hams, I was thinking back to our discussion last week with Asim and Nabi, and how he said of course, we remember those who are close to us and dear to us, but we have to think of all the other people who have been lost in this genocide. And the same goes for all those people, the thousands of people still disappeared into Israel's dungeons and torture camps. And so it's good to see in the last few weeks that Dr. Hussam in particular has been getting far more attention than he has for months and months and months. That's very, very welcome and important. His son has been speaking out, one of his sons, because Israel, as we know, murdered one of his sons during the genocide. And just to keep talking about him and all of those disappeared in Israel's horrific system of dungeons and torture camps.
Yeah. And this is also a pattern that that lawyers for Palestinians in these dungeons and torture camps talk about routinely, is that when these cases, obviously we need these cases to be publicized and for people to act, and not just, like Euromed says, not just issue condemnations and statements, but actually do something material to free these hostages. But every time that there is a modicum of attention in the media, their clients, these Palestinians, doctors, aid workers, students, teachers, fathers, mothers, are brutalized in prison again and again and again. And Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya being attacked with a hammer to his head by prison guards after last month's Israel, High Court appearance is just, again, we lose the language to describe accurately what this is. It's barbarity. It's demonic. It's sadistic, and it is still being carried out with full impunity. So where does this end?
We keep going, and we keep speaking out, and we've got a lot to cover in this show. So
there is
there really is. So let's go on, because we have a great guest, someone we've had before, Helena Cobban, and there's lots to talk about. So should we go ahead and do that? Let's
do it.
All right. So this is just a reminder that you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream, and I'm Ali Abunimah here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. Overnight, Iran struck U.S. military targets in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar. This came in retaliation for dozens of U.S. airstrikes across Iran. And a few hours ago, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that it had fired 10 ballistic missiles at a military base that is used by the U.S. military in Jordan. Earlier, people in Jordan reported hearing civil defense sirens. In recent days, the United States has been escalating tensions and violence in West Asia in flagrant violation of the ceasefire agreement that memorandum of understanding that the US and Iran signed a month ago, while at the same time Washington presents itself as the guardian of stability. After the failed Israeli-American war of aggression against Iran, the United States and Israel signed that agreement last month, in which the US conceded to key Iranian conditions and demands. At the time, US President Donald Trump made clear that he had no choice but to sign the deal, given the dire global energy situation brought about by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. It was an admission that despite Trump's bombast, Iran controls the vital shipping waterway and the US cannot open it by force. Yet Washington has continued trying to impose a regional order designed to protect Israel, discipline Iran and force it to submit, and to preserve American imperial domination over the region's most strategic waterways and energy routes. In what Iran says is a violation of the MOU, the US has been encouraging oil tankers to take a route through the strait that runs through Oman's territorial waters. Iran insists that for the 60-day interim period set out by the MOU, all ships must coordinate passage directly with its forces and go through the route Iran has designated. Iran has attacked several ships for failing to comply with these conditions, and the United States carried out attacks in Iran on the pretext of those Iranian actions. But the deeper issue is that Washington appears to be testing the limits of that June Memorandum of Understanding, including the provisions related to the Strait of Hormuz, as well as to Lebanon and other fronts as well. Iran, for its part, is insisting that any agreement must be reciprocal. It is not Iran that launched 2 surprise wars of aggression in less than a year, but Tel Aviv and Washington. It is Israel, with US backing, that occupies Palestine and Lebanon and carries out daily massacres amid an ongoing genocide. The latest escalation has taken place against the backdrop of the enormous funeral observances for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, murdered on the first day of the US-Israeli attack on February 28. The millions of people who have turned out in cities across Iran and Iraq demonstrate the resilience and strong base of support that the Islamic Republic of Iran enjoys. To discuss these developments and what they tell us about the changing balance in the region and globally, we're joined again by Helena Cobban. It's always a pleasure to have her with us. She is an analyst with decades of experience covering the region, and Helena Cobban directs Just World Educational and writes the newsletter Globalities. And I'll mention that Helena is co-author with Rami Khouri of the important book Understanding Hamas and Why It Matters. Helena, welcome back to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
It's great to be with you, Ali and Nora and the whole team there. I can hardly believe it's like day 1007. You guys have been amazing for these 1006 days.
Thank you so much, Helena. So good to see you.
Thank you, Helena. So let's start with the Strait of Hormuz and the broader Gulf region. What has been happening there in recent days? And do you see this as central to the fate of the Memorandum of Understanding? Trump suggested in recent days that the deal was over. And of course, we've seen this escalation of violence. Is this a return to full-scale war? Is that imminent? What do you think is going on?
So it's not just that Trump has suggested that the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed, he signed it in the Palace of Versailles on June 18th in 2 languages, in English and Farsi. So, you know, there could be no misunderstanding in terms of interpretation as to what it said. He signed it. It is an international agreement. And yesterday at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, he said he's tearing it up. He said it's ended. He called the government of Iran scum and other terrible words. So, you know, he's not just suggesting that he wants to end it. He is trying to shred it in a way much more blatant than what he has done in Lebanon, which we can discuss a little bit later, because obviously he's done a lot to shred it in Lebanon as well. So I just want to, if Tamara could bring up paragraph 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding, I think that would be helpful for people to see that. So this is what Trump signed. Upon signing of this MOU, the Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. So that is what Trump agreed to, that, you know, the Islamic Republic of Iran would make the arrangements. There's no mention there of CENTCOM or anybody else making arrangements. There is a provision lower down there that the Islamic Republic of Iran will conduct dialogue with the Sultanate of Oman to define the future administration and maritime services in the Strait, in discussion with other Persian Gulf littoral states, blah, blah, blah. So Tamara, if you could bring up map 2, that would be great. And then people can maybe understand a little bit about what's going on. I'm sure, like, no, not 2A. Yeah, that one. So as you can see here, there are the traditional pre-conflict routes to go around the Strait of Hormuz, which are white there. And then there are the Iranian routes that they have opened as of the 26th of June, which are a little bit to the north. And then down at the bottom, there is the route that Trump and his people persuaded a number of shipping, I think they were 2 tankers maybe from Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, which obviously are off to the west there, and an LNG vessel from Qatar. The Americans persuaded those ships to try the southern route and got, I guess they kind of twisted the arms of the Omanis to allow that to happen. And of course, what's going on here, maybe tomorrow we could get into map 1. So yeah, the Strait of Hormuz, all of it is territorial waters. There's no international water here. Half of it, roughly speaking, belongs to Oman, which has that little bit at the tip beneath the Strait of Hormuz, and half of it belongs to Iran, which, if you think about trying to drive a very large, very heavy tanker or LNG vessel or container ship around these very tight curves, you do not go fast. You have to go, you know, maybe 5-10 miles an hour, or as they say in shipping, knots, which is kind of equivalent to a mile an hour. So you go slowly, and you have to go along the agreed shipping lanes because there are other big ships there and you don't want to like crash into them. So on June 18th, that's what Trump agreed, that Iran gets to administer this for 60 days, during which they will have conversations with Oman and the other Gulf states over the lasting arrangements for shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. That is what Trump agreed, signed in 2 languages in the Palace of Versailles on June 18th. And that is what he tore up on Tuesday, when he and his military people strong-armed, I want to say, persuaded maybe, the Omanis, the Saudis, the Bahrainis, and the Emiratis to use a different route. And so, to nobody's surprise, the Iranians were pretty angry, especially this was taking place, you know, right in the heart of their funeral observances for the late supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was murdered. Of course, people here will know this, murdered along with many of his family members and about 120 senior officials of the Islamic Republic of Iran on that opening day, February 28th, of this US-Israeli aggression. So, you know, the whole of Iran and many of its neighbors have been involved, I want to say since Saturday, in planning and then carrying out these mass observances. And we'll get to talk about that a little bit later. And as everybody knows, should know, the final step of this is today in Mashhad, in the east of Iran, where Ayatollah Khamenei is being buried. So clearly, Trump and the, let's say, the hawks in his cabinet planned to interrupt this, you know, very solemn observance by, this is just some of it. This is probably, this is from Iran earlier this week, quite possibly from Qom, which is a holy city. They started out in Tehran with, I saw accounts that were more than 10 million people in Tehran coming to this. And then they went to Qom, which is a holy city a little bit to the south. And then yesterday they went to Najaf and Karbala, which are very holy Shiite cities. I think maybe this is from Najaf or Karbala. Very holy Shiite cities in the south of Iraq, and we can come later and talk about what all of that means. But
Helena, before we do want to talk more about these extraordinary scenes from the funeral processions across Iran and Iraq, but to go back to what you've described, what's the motive? It's clear the U.S., Trump and the U.S. are violating the MOU. The language is very clear that Iran is to organize shipping, at least through this interim period. And then beyond that, it's to be organized by Iran and its neighbors. The US is not mentioned at all. The French Navy, the British Navy, the US Navy are not in there at all. And also, it's very clear that from the language you showed us in the MOU, that it refers to commercial shipping. So we're talking about commercial ships, not warships, and certainly not American warships passing through the strait. When he signed the MOU, Trump was very candid, in fact, more than people would normally expect of an American leader. And he said we had 4 weeks of oil reserves left, basically. That situation still continues to deteriorate. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve is depleted by more than 50% from where it was before the war, and by some measures even more than that, because you can't actually take it down to zero for technical reasons. What's the goal? What are they trying to do? Have the reasons changed for why they're still in the same bind in terms of energy? Why do they think, what's their game? Why do they want to blow this deal up?
Well, gosh, I mean, a lot of people here in Washington, D.C. do spend a lot of time trying to worry, like, what is Trump thinking of? Honestly, I think that's a waste of time, because trying to figure out what happens in that morass of neurons up at the top of his skull is a waste of time. I think clearly somebody persuaded him that, the Iranian authorities are all going to be very busy with the funeral, so let's just poke them a little bit, or test the shipping situation in Hormuz. And, so I think that was a test on Tuesday, when they tried to send the few tankers and LNG carrier through, and the Iranians immediately responded. They were not asleep. They were not all busy with the funeral observances. So they got right back. And first of all, I mean, they have not admitted that it was they who sent drones against these ships. And the ships, as far as I can understand, there have been no casualties, but the ships turned around and went back. There was some physical damage to the bridges of these ships. And since then, only one ship has been seen by the satellites going along the Omani route, but the Iranians did not just, well, so this was all on Tuesday. The Iranians hit at the ships. And then the Americans, clearly CENTCOM people, felt we've got to respond to that. So they responded. And then the Iranians responded. So like on Tuesday night and yesterday night, Wednesday night, there were very substantial exchanges of fire between the American and Iranian militaries, including most recently, we had these ballistic missiles fired against the American base in Jordan, which is interesting because, as you know, Jordan is very close to Israel. And, if they can get ballistic missiles, there is a sort of a guessing game, like how deep are the Iranian reserves of these missiles and how intact are their delivery systems. I think obviously the Israelis and the Americans were both very, very surprised after the assault of February 28th at the survival of not just the political echelon in Iran, but also the various wings of the military echelon, and the fact that they had this like survivability doctrine that they called mosaic system of delegating to people in various commanders in various parts of the country how you should respond. And if your local commander gets killed, this is the designated person who takes his place. And if that person is killed, this is the designated third person. I mean, they had really, over the decades, built up this very resilient and, from an organizational point of view, you could say it's redundant, but it's planned redundancy, because if your commander gets killed, this is the guy who steps into his shoes. And this is, if the central commander is killed, these are the regional commanders who will make the decisions, and this is the basis on which they'll do it. So the Iranians have stunned, I want to say, they stunned the Israelis with their ability to be both politically and militarily resilient. I wrote about this maybe a couple of months ago, on my Substack, which is where I'm doing most of my writing now, by the way, not on globalities, but on helenacobban.substack.com. I think everybody's moving to Substack these days, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and nobody in the Pentagon knows how much the Iranians have in reserve, but it's obviously from February 28th onwards, considerably more capabilities in Iran than what the Israelis and Americans thought. So that's one part of the equation. And the other is obviously the economic and also military effects for the US military, because we know that when they went to the initial MOU, well, there was the ceasefire in early April, after, I want to say, about, 6 weeks of very active fighting. And then they went to the early ceasefire, and then they codified that June 17th, 18th in the MOU, which was signed in Islamabad. So the Americans did that, as you noted, because the petroleum reserves were going down. Global prices of everything were starting to go up. And of course, prices in this country, given that there are going to be midterm elections, they're coming fairly soon now. It's going to be in early November. US financial markets were very happy when the MOU was signed and have started to get jitters now. So that's another thing that could happen, a real, financial crisis of some scale. And of course, the supplies of US and allied interceptors for anti-missile and anti-drone warfare, very, very low, which is why he couldn't give any, or couldn't give nearly enough to the Ukrainians, and said, well, you guys go and make your own. That happened at the NATO summit yesterday. Of course, the Ukrainians, it would take them about 2 or 3 years to be able to get those production lines up and running. But I think that's a major constraint for military planners in this country at a global level. There are not enough interceptors and all the things that organize the interception process, those radomes and radars and sensors and whatever, to really do what they want to do, what they want to plan to do. For example, to fend the Chinese off from Taiwan. So I'm mystified as to why Trump is doing what he's doing, but I think maybe the Israelis got to talk to him yet again, as they had back in February. Remember in February they said it's going to be a cakewalk, in Iran. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this also is just kind of this historic belligerence of the U.S. empire. They can sign agreements that they know they're going to break and they're not going to, actually adhere to. And they can kind of do what they want. And Trump being, a salesman, a con man, kind of, with this bravado. It could be that he just, I'll say, oh, I'm at this palace in Versailles. It's so beautiful. And there's, so many gilded, ceilings or whatever. And what a great place to sign this deal that I know I don't have to adhere to because I'm the president of the empire. And a real, again, historic misunderstanding of Iranian resilience and strategic planning on their part. Plus the geographical, the lands, the topographical, power that Iran has in that area of its own country and in its own waters. Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned resilience, Iran's internal resilience and its regional reach as we look at what it's, what it's able to do in terms of exact a price on the U.S. and Israel on these military bases around the region, but also in terms of the huge funeral observances for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, across Iran and Iraq. What does this say about this regional power in West Asia?
Yeah, well, part of the background of this, of course, is that after the January riots inside Iran, the Israelis and others told Trump that this can be a cakewalk, that if you just sort of dent the regime in Tehran a little bit, then the people will rise up. And a lot of that was reflected in Trump's very early rhetoric at the beginning of the war. He said things like, now it's up to the people of Iran and whatever. And now he has the answer from the people of Iran.
And the son of the Shah announced that he'd set up an interim government.
Right, I forgot that detail. God. Did he announce
Incredible.
it in Israel? I can't remember, but
no, he wasn't. He announced it on Twitter, like everything else these days.
Yeah, so this was really, these funeral observances were the answer from the Islamic Republic. And I've heard so many accounts and read so many accounts of people who had, back in January, perhaps been a little bit, maybe they participated in some of those anti-government protests. But then the moment the US-Israeli assault happened, people just started to rally around their national government for reasons that were probably a huge mix of reasons, religious, ideological, nationalist. it's very familiar to me because I grew up in England in the 1950s. And, my parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles were all in London under the Nazi blitzkrieg. You rally around your government when you're being bombed by obnoxious outsiders. So I think, these funeral observances have sought to kind of consolidate that feeling of rallying around the flag. And from the clips that I've seen of some of the, I wish I spoke Farsi, but I don't. But from what I gather, a lot of the chants are extremely hardline, seeking vengeance, saying things like, they killed our leader, we will come and kill you, which is quite understandable, again, just thinking back to my family under the Blitz. And a lot of red flags, which I gather is a kind of a hardline flag. I know there's a very active kind of internal politics in Iran, which people in this country tend to completely ignore, and they think somehow the government keeps in power only through repression, which is not the case at all. There's very vibrant discussion inside Iran. And actually, if people want to, if you haven't watched this great conversation, the hour-long conversation that Max Blumenthal had with Professor Morandi as they drove to the funeral in Tehran on, I think, Monday or whenever it was, they drove. And so they're sitting in the car, and Max, of course, asks very smart questions, but Morandi is just talking and reflecting on the politics, and reflecting some on his understanding of Khamenei's deep intellectual engagement with so many things that you wouldn't expect an Ayatollah to be engaged with, Western literature, Time magazine, all kinds of stuff that he would follow very closely. So these funeral observances, and I don't know, Tamara, maybe you could bring up map 2A now, because they do kind of show, okay, that's Iran and Iraq. And so Najaf and Karbala, which is where the funeral went yesterday, are in Iraq, a little bit south of Baghdad. And then up at the north of Iran is Tehran. Obviously, that's where they started on Monday. And then they went to Qom, a little bit south of Tehran. And at some point overnight, they went from Najaf and Karbala, which are I've been to both Najaf and Karbala. I think I wasn't supposed to go, not being a Shiite believer, not being a Muslim, but I put on an abaya, and my Lebanese Arabic was pretty damn good back then. So I passed as a Lebanese pilgrim. But so yesterday they went from Najaf and Karbala over to Mashhad in the northeast of Iran. And everywhere they went, there were, hundreds of thousands and millions of pilgrims coming to mourn their slain leader. One of the outrageous things that Trump and his military did today was they bombed the railroad that leads to Mashhad, so that a lot of the people who wanted to travel there by rail could not. And the other thing they did last night was they bombed a bridge that's, if you see where the Caspian Sea is, and look at the bottom right-hand corner of the Caspian Sea.
The Caspian Sea is right at the top of the map, and that's just for some of us who are geographically challenged. And of course, the Caspian Sea is I think, enclosed. It's basically a giant lake, but on the north shore, which I think is just off the map, is Russia.
Right. Thank you, Ali. It's actually quite a long sea from north to south. So down at that bottom right corner, there was a very important bridge on the railroad that links Tehran to China. And last night, the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 bombed that bridge. So the bridge and the railroad, really interesting and important, because that railroad was opened. It goes directly from Urumqi in Western China to Tehran. Well, directly, that is, it goes through Tajikistan and Kazakhstan and a bunch of other countries. That is a real kind of one source of the Iranians' resiliency, having the ability to import sensitive goods by railroad directly. There are other railroads that come in via Pakistan, which is down there, bottom right of the picture. I'm only seeing a very small version of the map here. I'm not sure how useful it is. But I guess what I want to say is that the governing authorities proved with these funeral observances a number of things. They proved that they retain the strong adherence and support of, I want to say, a majority of people in all these places, all these different parts of Iran. They proved that they have unbelievable administrative capabilities to be able to organize all this. I mean, people who were there on the streets. Ali, you're muted.
So are you sure they're not forcing all of those millions of people to come out?
Oh, silly me. I should have thought of that. Of course,
Yes.
They're forcing them. Yeah.
Yes.
But they also attracted huge numbers of, by the way, that was a joke from Ali, I think. They also had large numbers of foreign dignitaries there. So organizing all of that was huge. For example, they had somebody, I think the deputy foreign minister from Saudi Arabia, and they had the deputy speaker of the Chinese parliament, and they had people from Azerbaijan and from, I think, most Arab countries, and obviously from Turkey. And each of these dignitaries was like given a special welcome.
And a special Quranic verse, pointed Quranic verse.
Yeah, so to be able to organize all that, that does kind of prove that they have not crippled the government. Plus, it demonstrates the international support that the government retains. And this is really important. We need to recall that the MOU of June 18th was issued in the name or mediated by Pakistan, which is obviously an important neighbor of both Iran and China. And it was negotiated behind the scenes, hard to say negotiated. The Pakistanis did more than passing messages. I think they probably suggested language for how this thing could come together. It took them a long time, starting, I want to say, in late March. The Pakistanis had convened a meeting of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey, three very large Muslim majority countries in West Asia, all of them very pro-American. So the Pakistanis brought them together. And remember that Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan was the guy who said he was going to nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, he is also very pro-American at one level, but he has intriguing relationship with the Chinese that was proven. Its value was proven in May of 2025 when there was a skirmish, a very serious skirmish between the air forces of Pakistan and India. Pakistan was using mainly Chinese tech, and they absolutely wiped the floor with the Indians. So there is a sort of a Chinese dimension here in many ways. It was the Chinese back in March of 2023 who had brought about a reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. That is also part of what's happening here. So the regional politics are fascinating, and they prove that the Israelis have failed in their bid to become the dominant power across all of West Asia, and that is really important.
I'm just listening to you with just sort of painting these incredibly nuanced yet broad brushstrokes across the whole region and the world. That I could certainly listen to you, just let you keep talking. But let's focus it a little bit. You know, we've gone as far east as Pakistan. Let's come back.
No. We went to China, Annie.
We did, but we're also going to come back to. I'm still thinking regionally. I'm thinking too small. You're thinking much more globally. So I have to up my game. But let's come back to further west a little bit and focus in on Lebanon and the sort of the region of Lebanon, Palestine. Obviously, Iran had demanded as part of the MOU, and it's there in the first article of the Memorandum of Understanding, a ceasefire on all fronts, particularly Lebanon. And you have talked about, you've compared and at the same time, the US brokered this agreement later in June. So we had the US-Iran agreement earlier in June, I think it was June 12th. And then about 2 weeks later, the US brokered this agreement between the Lebanese government and Israel, which basically contradicts the MOU in certain ways, because it sort of legitimizes Israel's continued occupation of large parts of Lebanon. You've compared that agreement of June 26, 2026, with the May 17th, 1983 agreement between Israel and Lebanon, which some of us will know, but a lot of us won't know at all what that is. So give us some of the context and bring us up to date on why this comparison is relevant.
Right. Well, so the May 17th agreement of 1983 was concluded by President Amin Gemayel of Lebanon, who was acting under huge influence of the Americans, who had a large Marines force there in Lebanon. This was shortly before the bombing of the Marines barracks and things that happened to the American presence. But more importantly, May of 1983 came just a few months after the Israelis' invasion of Lebanon. So the Israelis have invaded Lebanon many times. The first time was in 1978. I was able to cover that on the ground. The second time, the biggest and most violent time, was in 1982, the big invasion that they launched in June of 1982. That was followed by the exit of the PLO fighters from Beirut, based on an American, Ronald Reagan, giving his word for the security of the Palestinian civilians left behind in refugee camps in Lebanon. And in mid-September of 1982, Ariel Sharon and Bashir Gemayel was killed. He had at that point been the president. And then Sharon, as a like way of responding to the assassination of Bashir Gemayel, which, by the way, was not done by a Palestinian, but he sent Bashir Gemayel's militiamen these very genocidal really, I mean, I saw these people, they call themselves the Lebanese forces. They were nearly all Maronite Christians. They were deeply anti-Palestinian, and Sharon sent them into the refugee camps in Sabra and Shatila. So we had those massacres. So the Americans then said, okay, well, the Israelis need to withdraw a little bit. We will send US Marines to keep the peace. And under the influence of the US-Israeli condominium in Beirut, Bashir Jamal's brother Amin who had become president, was forced to sign this peace agreement. It went much further than the more recent agreement because it was an actual peace agreement between Lebanon and Israel. And it lasted 10 months until massive popular opposition in Lebanon from all the sects, with the possible exception of the Maronites. There were some anti-peace agreement Maronites, but very few. But all the other sects in Lebanon just came together and opposed it. And so I want to say 10 months after May of 1983, that would have been like March of 1984, Amin Jamal very, very humbly went to Damascus and said, I'm going to rescind this friends again. and President Assad said, okay, on these conditions, we can be friends again. So that one lasted 10 months. I don't know how long this one will last. It's not even a peace agreement. During that period, from May 17th, 1983 onwards, the opposition grew, obviously, amongst the Druze in Lebanon and amongst the Shiites in Lebanon, who until then had been pretty split. But the Israelis remained in all of South Lebanon, from the southern areas of Beirut on to the south. And it was that continuing Israeli occupation of South Lebanon that gave birth to Hezbollah. There was no Hezbollah before the Israeli invasion. So, you sow the wind and you reap the whirlwind, I guess.
Well, to draw that comparison out a bit, so a few months before that May 1983 agreement, the PLO, which was the major resistance force, which had been the major resistance force in Lebanon, was basically forced out of Lebanon. And this happened just so in September 1982, there was the massacres in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. And those had occurred, or they were able to happen, and they're carried out by Israeli-backed militias with the support and under the protection of the Israeli military. Thousands of Palestinian civilian refugees were murdered in the two refugee camps, and that only happened because the PLO armed forces had left Lebanon with an American guarantee that the Palestinian refugee camps and the Palestinian refugees would be safe. And that guarantee proved to be absolutely worthless, because what actually happened is these absolutely horrific massacres. And the pictures of them, which I remember seeing as a child in Time magazine and Newsweek, because that's what we had in those days, something that marked me for life. And you can say more about your experience on the ground in Lebanon. But what I want to say is they came at a moment where Israel and the United States perhaps thought they had defeated the resistance in Lebanon. Of course, there was no Hezbollah. Then Hezbollah arose as Israel entrenched its occupation in Lebanon. And I'm wondering if this agreement too, the current agreement, is motivated by a false belief that they have also significantly weakened the resistance in Lebanon. This time, of course, not in the form of Palestinian resistance, but in the form of Hezbollah. If that's the case, and I want to hear your view on that, why do they keep miscalculating like this? Why do they keep underestimating the will of the people in Lebanon and in the region more broadly to resist and to stay on their land?
Ali. So we have to understand there are two parallel things, sets of diplomacy going on regarding Lebanon right now. We still have the provisions of the Memorandum of Understanding. That first paragraph of it, if Tamara could bring that up, it actually, it says that the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran and their allies in the current war undertake from now on not to initiate any war, any military operation against each other. Final deal. Okay. They declare the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon. And then Lebanon is mentioned again. Ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. So that is a solemn undertaking from President Trump on behalf of his government and apparently of his allies, which I guess would be Israel. Of course, the Israelis always objected to the whole of the MOU. So then Trump also has this parallel process. The MOU is kind of overseen by Vice President J.D. Vance, along with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. The parallel process in the State Department here, this series of meetings between Lebanese and Israeli diplomats that reached, I think it was called a framework agreement on June 26th, run by Marco Rubio. So there's a lot of people who say this is kind of Rubio versus Vance. And they are both kind of trying to get Trump's support for them to be the next president, let's say, auditioning for the role by showing their diplomatic smarts. I don't think it's quite like that. I think Trump just loves to play people off against each other. So, Marco, you go and do this in the State Department, and JD, you go and do this in Islamabad. And, he's a kind of master of chaos. And the other part of this is that it keeps the attention on him. Gosh, what will Trump do? Which way will Trump jump? And he loves that. He loves that chaos, and he loves being, the person at the heart of it. But he did sign this international agreement that was, the first iteration of it was signed in Versailles in the presence of all the G7 people. And it was mediated by Pakistan with the support and backing of China and these other Muslim countries that I had mentioned earlier. So, if the international community as a whole wants to hold him to his word, they could and should do that. And the sooner, the better. Because all this stuff that's going on in the State Department with Marco Rubio has zero weight in, international law. I mean, it's not like an international agreement that has been signed by the head of our government here, by our president. It's some airy-fairy thing that Marco Rubio wanted to organize. But of course, that leaves it to Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Egypt, and now Qatar. Qatar hosted the follow-up meeting that was, a couple of weeks ago. And so there is also something called the Pakistan-Qatar Declaration on how all this stuff, how the MOU should be implemented. And they're going to, that's when they set up a deconfliction cell for Lebanon and this and that. But I think with his actions this week of tearing up the whole of the MOU. Trump has put an end to that whole process that needs to be, if it's going to be saved, the MOU process, it needs to be saved by Pakistan, China, Saudi Arabia, and all those other actors, because the world cannot stand. I mean, the global economy, the economy of the global South, US consumers cannot stand for a wholesale return to the fighting. And I think Trump didn't figure that out. He just loves to make big gestures, but he doesn't think it through. And so it's up to the adults in the international community now to rein him in. And the MOU provided a way forward, but it's obviously needs a lot more work.
Yeah. And then, kind of circling back to Palestine, I mean, the so-called ceasefire that is now 9-10 months ago was signed. More than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed. So many children. The humanitarian aid situation that was promised under the supposed ceasefire agreement, of course, has gotten worse, not better. Israel is now taking upwards of 70% of Gaza's land, over and over and over. The violations of the ceasefire occurring on a minute-to-minute basis over the last 10 months. And then just a few days ago, Hamas recently announced a declaration about the future of its governance role in Gaza, saying that they were essentially dissolving the administrative government. And there's been so much kind of back and forth in the mainstream media about what this means. How do you look at Hamas's announcement, why they did it now, what it signifies, and really, I mean, what the strategy is behind this announcement here?
Announcement, because what they did was they announced the dissolving of something called the Emergency Committee, which is the body through which they have exercised governance over Gaza. I want to say for many years now, I can't remember exactly since when, but they have always done this within a broader framework of saying this is and should be a national Palestinian responsibility. It should be part of the the PA process that they had entered in January of 2006 with huge reservations, because remember, back in the 1990s, Hamas was very opposed to the whole PA process and everything that came from Oslo. So in 2006, they entered the parliamentary elections under the PA auspices, and they won them. And that, everything goes back to that, what happened then. So since 2006, they have kind of held on to ruling over Gaza in the name of a broader Palestinian entity for a number of reasons. One is that they don't want to see Gaza cut off from the rest of the Palestinian issue. They always underline that, Gaza is part of Palestine, and we are entering into this process to try to end the occupation of 1967 on the way station to, getting full rights for everybody in the whole of Palestine. And it's a very nuanced and complex argument that they make. But so they've dissolved this. I don't know exactly why they did so, but one thing I note is that the Israelis and their the many collaborators that they have in Gaza. So the Israeli collaborators basically are on the west side of the yellow line. They're totally under Israeli military control. they've been, the Israelis and their collaborators have been systematically picking off government officials in the, let's call it the majority ruled Gaza area that's been under Hamas's control. You know, policemen, police officers, local government people. I mean, honestly, when I see our friend Asim and Nabih trying to do what he's doing in the name of a governance authority, I just, you know, I'm terrified for his life. Honestly, he's exactly the kind of technocrat that they would be targeting.
Yeah.
So,
well,
actually,
just to be clear, Asim was for many years working with the Gaza City municipality throughout the genocide. He has an engineering background, but for the last year or so, he has moved into being a full-time journalist with Al Arabi TV, another category of people who is systematically targeted by Israel. But yes, you're right, Helena, of course, that the goal is to make Gaza ungovernable and to collapse any kind of system of administration or organized life in order to ultimately force people to leave.
Or to go into those terrible concentration camps, which have a long, long history in colonial governance. I just want to come back quickly to what Hamas people say they were trying to do with this latest move of dissolving the emergency committee. It seems that they were trying to open the way to welcoming into Gaza the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, which is a body created under the Board of Peace. All Palestinian technocrats under the leadership of, I think, Dr. Ali Shaf, currently located in Cairo. And the Israelis don't let the National Committee under the Board of Peace, they don't let it go to Gaza and administer Gaza. So, you know, so if the Board of Peace had any integrity, I was about to say cojones, but no, I don't even want to think about that. If they had any integrity, they would insist that, you know, their own committee would be able to go and administer Gaza. So I think the Hamas leaders took this step to underline it is not we who are preventing this from happening. It is the Board of Peace. I have to say, the Board of Peace exists maybe in somebody's imagination. You know, actually down the street from us here in Northwest DC, there was a big gala kind of opening for the Board of Peace. When was it? Back in November or December, and dignitaries from all around the world came and blah, blah, blah. They don't have any budget.
Yeah.
You know, they're not doing anything. It's everything that's happening in Gaza is still under the uncontested control of the Israeli military. And that includes, obviously, them pushing forward the yellow line in order to constrict the Palestinian held areas even more, and, you know, preventing the entry of the aid trucks, which, if you look back at that ceasefire agreement that Hamas did sign in early October, there was to be a complete ceasefire and the entry of 600 trucks a day. And what Hamas did not sign in that agreement was they did not agree to disarm.
And on that point, Helena, if I may, I'd like to look at the response that Dr. Ali Shaf gave regarding the statement from Hamas about its willingness to dissolve its governance committee. I think this is very important. Ali Shaf is a former deputy minister in the Ramallah-based Palestinian Authority and appointed by the so-called Board of Peace to head this National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. And he says, in a series of tweets, the first one is there, following today's announcement regarding the dissolution of the Emergency Committee in Gaza and the completion of preparations to transfer administrative responsibilities to the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 And then he continues. I don't know if you're able to follow to the next tweets, Tamara, but I'll keep reading. He says, we affirm that 𝐓𝐿𝐿 stands fully prepared to assume its national responsibilities as soon as the necessary conditions and enabling measures for its work are in place. Then he says, this is the crucial part. The essential requirements for the committee's effective functioning include the existence of a single governing authority operating under one legal framework with a clear mandate and a unified security apparatus accountable to that authority. These prerequisites are fundamental to establishing the political, administrative, and security environment for the committee to carry out its responsibilities effectively. Now, what does that mean? The essential requirements include the existence of a single governing authority operating under one legal framework with a clear mandate and a unified security apparatus. The way I read that is Hamas has to disarm. The resistance has to disarm before the National Committee can get going. In other words, I'm reading this, I want to hear your view, as Ali Shath, Dr. Ali Shath, parroting the line of Nikolai Mladenov, the so-called High Representative of the Board of Peace, and parroting the line of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, and parroting the line of the so-called international community, that that they are going to withhold governance and withhold services and withhold humanitarian aid until the resistance surrenders. Is that a correct reading or not?
You know, it is one correct reading, but I think the fact that he doesn't actually say the words disarm is good. And I also note that a lot of people close to Hamas have said that they will, once there is a legitimate governing authority in Gaza, that they will be prepared to fold their military capabilities into those of the legitimate governing authority. I mean, this is very traditional in all movements of decolonization, that, whether you're talking about the Mau Mau or the FLN or, any national liberation movement, once you have a legitimate national ruling authority, you dissolve your militias and you have, I think there is the potential for negotiation between Hamas leaders and Dr. Ali Shath. I know there has been in the past, and I think negotiation is not closed off by these statements. Of course, the whole disarmament issue goes back very evidently to what we talked about earlier, which was 1982 in Lebanon, when you had the American president guaranteeing the well-being of unarmed Palestinian civilians left in Beirut. And ever since then, Palestinians have said, what is the value of an American presidential guarantee? I mean, it's a conundrum for the whole world to take on. But obviously the authorities in Gaza have to figure out how to serve the best interests of the people there. And they need all the support and all the help from everybody around the world. I think, I must say, I wish that in paragraph 1 of the Memorandum of Understanding, I wish that the Iranians had held out to specify not just Lebanon, but also specify Gaza or Palestine more broadly. I guess, they got 3 mentions of Lebanon there, and the only possible reference to anything in Palestine is permanent termination of the war on all fronts, including in Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this is what they felt they could get.
Yeah, we did discuss that a few weeks ago, and of course, Dr. Marandi has talked about that often, Mohammed Marandi of the University of Tehran, and he said just in the last few days again, he's repeated, he said that, if the Americans decide they want to actually proceed with this memorandum of understanding and the negotiations, he says Gaza will be on the table. Iran will not allow this situation to continue. But we will see. Helena, this has been such a rich discussion. We've got more to talk about. Unfortunately, we don't have time today, but we will have you back because you have just taken us on an incredible journey of knowledge and context and history and analysis that we will certainly want to continue. So I hope you'll join us again soon. And in the meantime, can you remind people where they can continue to find your analysis and writing and work?
Great. Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and I will hang around for as much of Jon Elmer's report as I can, because I know he's going to be talking about a lot of this stuff too. People should go to my personal site is now Helena Cobban, or one word, substack.com. And the site for Just World Educational is justworlded, or one word, .substack.com. And so please come and see our stuff there. And Nora is on our board, so she's very special to us, but you're special too, Ali.
Thank you. Major conflict of interest just revealed there. Major conflict. Well, we're really grateful for the work you do, Helena, you and your colleagues, and thank you again. And we hope to talk to you soon, and we'll be following your work in the meantime.
Thanks, Helena.
Bye then.
Bye. Oh,
so much. I just feel like I'm sitting around the table with Helena, and I want to go deep into all these subjects and all this history. And then I remember we have a lot left in this show, so we have to keep going. So but you can see how much knowledge and experience
I've
Helena
learned
has.
so much from her.
Yeah.
Over the last, 20 years. Yeah, she's just incredible. A wealth of knowledge and so much information and analysis at her fingertips. So I'm really glad we got her on. This was exactly the right time to have her.
Right. Yeah. And unlike many people comment on these things, she has a long history of reporting in and from the region, several books, including the latest one, Understanding Hamas. So we'll have her back soon.
Yes, we will. Well, let's bring on Jon. Hey, how's it going?
It's great to hear from Helena.
Yeah.
Hi, Jon. We missed you.
Yeah, I'm back.
People had all sorts of conspiracies.
Yes.
Why you were gone.
They're all false.
Actually, you can tell that this is an AI generated Jon. May not be the real one. I'm feeding the conspiracies here. Watch his mouth and see if the words sync with the movements.
You can tell by the eyebrows. So kind of bouncing off of what Helena just talked about, you're going to be kind of drilling a little deeper into what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz, and especially the last 24, 48 hours with the U.S. hitting Iranian targets and Iran responding to U.S. military bases in the region. What else are you going to cover?
Well, I'm just going to show the physical geography of this battle, which I think is sometimes left out although it wasn't with Helena. It was great to have that from Helena, the maps, and just understand the geography of the struggle, the terrain of the struggle, and just how much of an asset that is for Iran, and how there's nothing the United States can do about that. So tearing up the memorandum of understanding it's not going to benefit the United States. So I'll break down that, show you why.
Great. And a little bit about South Lebanon as well.
And also South Lebanon, because I missed last week. So I just want to bring everybody up on the, I don't even know what we're supposed to call it. A ceasefire? It's not a ceasefire, but every ceasefire is not like this.
So war fire, continuous fire.
We need to come up with a better term.
Yeah, kidding.
Well,
go ahead,
take
Ali.
it away, Jon.
All right, you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report on day 1007 of Israel's genocide in Gaza, day 132 of the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, day 130 of the battle in South Lebanon, this latest round, and day 19 of the ceasefire in Lebanon, such as it is, followed the Memorandum of Understanding signed between the U.S. and Iran 3 weeks ago. I am reporting this on the afternoon of Thursday, July the 9th. I'm going to cover the status of the ceasefire in Lebanon shortly, but let's start with the Strait of Hormuz, where the U.S. and Iran have exchanged fire over the last few days in the largest attacks since the Memorandum of Understanding was signed, the 14-point framework agreement. So the maps, to get our bearings, there's going to be a lot of maps in this because I think that the maps really do show the military bind that the United States is in. We can see the Strait of Hormuz there in the center and along the coast of the Persian Gulf from Kuwait, Saudi, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE in the Gulf. 20% of the world's oil, a little more than that of natural gas, and then all kinds of precursors and petrochemical products, fertilizers, all running low all around the world because of this. And there is a clear solution to this that has been stated by Iran over and over. Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, said the Hormuz Strait will never return to its pre-war status. The MOU Point 5 says, understanding the signing of this MOU, the Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days. The Islamic Republic of Iran will conduct dialogue with the Sultanate of Oman to determine the future administration and maritime services in the Strait of Hormuz in discussion with the other Persian Gulf littoral states and in line with the application of international law and sovereign rights of the coastal states of the Strait of Hormuz. Has nothing to do with the United States, as was previously mentioned, nothing to do with CENTCOM. This is Iranian territorial waters that after the United States and Israel launched an unprovoked war of aggression on the state of Iran, Iran closed down that Strait of Hormuz to the parties to the conflict. It is from each of those states that you see there, from the top, from Kuwait, from Saudi, from Bahrain, from Qatar, from the UAE. Those are the bases from which Iran is being struck by the Americans, and also to include bases in Saudi Arabia and Jordan as well. But these are states that are in active conflict with Iran on the side of the United States, allowing the United States to use that security infrastructure from the global war on terror era to be used to fight Iran. And Iran is not having that, and that is clear. Let's take a look at the next map because we can keep in mind where those countries are. And here, see it as a different angle. This is actually a photograph taken from an astronaut in the International Space Station that just shows you Iran to the north there and the Zagros Mountains that are a natural border around the Persian Gulf and the high ground over all of that territory through which the world's oil flows. You can see on this map from Kuwait City through Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Oman on this map as well. And the Strait of Hormuz up there in the top right-hand corner. All of the petrochemicals, all of the oil and gas has to pass through that strait to exit the Persian Gulf. Incidentally, this photograph was taken with a Nikon D5 with a 28 millimeter lens. So it's an actual photograph from an astronaut on the space station. We've got another one of those coming up here next, where you can actually see how the Strait of Hormuz operates. It's a tiny strip of land. We saw on the previous map how shallow the waters are. It has all kinds of military complications for the United States. And that is why the Iranians have asserted control over this corridor in order to have a leverage point, a permanent strategic asset that they are going to wield, a strategic geographic asset that isn't going to change. And the Iranians are asserting that control, as was agreed to in the Memorandum of Understanding. Earlier this week, 3 commercial vessels, 1 LNG liquid natural gas ship from Qatar, 1 crude carrier from Saudi, and a UAE flagged crude carrier had projectiles fired at them as warning shots when they were traveling outside of the Iranian set corridors. That is what tipped off what has happened this week. But you can see that the United States followed that up by saying that there are more than 20 U.S. Navy warships patrolling the waters across the Middle East as CENTCOM forces continue to promote regional security and stability. But none of them are in this picture that you're looking at right now. They're not coming close to the strait. They're not escorting ships through the strait. They are giving coordinates to ships that want to go through the Omani route, which I'll show you coming up here in a second. The way the ships are escorted, insofar as they even are escorted, it's by air. It's not, the United States does not have the naval capacity to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz, or really the guts to do it. As you can see, Iran has all of the overwatch, the high points, and the ships going slow through that corridor are sitting ducks. So that was number 3. Let's look at number 4, because we could see the satellite image here of this one shows the the overwatch that Iran has from the mainland. And also there's a lot of talk about where the missiles are fired from, or the drones. They don't need to be fired from the coastline. They could be fired from deep inside Iran to hit those targets. So it's not simply the overwatch, it's the entire strategic depth of the country behind that strait. So 3 ships were struck in a 24-hour window. Iran did not take credit for those ships, though their foreign ministry did say that the ships were traveling in the Omani corridor, not through the approved corridor that Iran has stated. The Iranian armed forces said yesterday that it is declared once again that the only safe passage for transit of commercial ships and oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz is the route determined by the Islamic Republic of Iran. You can take a look at number 5 here, and you can see the strategic importance of the Persian Gulf that we looked at in those other photos, because this one shows you all the key oil refineries and terminals all along the coastline of the Persian Gulf there in front of Kuwait and Saudi, Bahrain, less in Bahrain, but in Qatar. Bahrain hosts the U.S. CENTCOM's regional naval headquarters is in Bahrain. But you can see both in this map where the key refineries are, all of which could be targeted if Trump wants to escalate this war, and also the proximity of these countries. They're able to be hit. Iran is able to hit U.S. bases in these areas because they are so close, and they can use missiles, as we'll see coming up here shortly, that are very accurate and effective missiles. And that is the case for their longer range ballistic missiles, but it's very much the case for their tactical ballistic missiles and short range ballistic missiles. Let's take a look at number 6, because you can see this territorial waters. Again, this is not a stretch for Iran to say that ships should pass through the Iranian route, because the majority of the strait requires that in any case. The areas off the coast of Oman are shallow, as we saw in that first map that I showed you that had the depths. They're shallow. It's not the best route through there. The United States is trying to pose a secondary route to try to deny Iran this asset that came out of a war that the United States launched. Let's take a look at the next slide. This is the Iranian IRGC Navy map that was put out. Again, there's been minor tweaks to it, but only in the smallest ways. And those are projected over radio to the ships that are safely transiting through the Iranian route. And over the past, before this week's dust up and the exchange of fire, the Iranian route was working well and increasing traffic from zero, effectively zero, through the Strait of Hormuz, up to as much as a third of what the pre-war levels were. And firing on the ships is a message to the underwriters, to the insurers, to follow the rules of this corridor. And it's not the only, Iran is not the only one that exerts control over its territorial waters. Other countries do this. Turkey does this as well. In Canada, Arctic, we have transit fees in Canada as well. So this is not something that Iran has pulled out of a hat. There's a long record for it. And that is why Iranians have said that they're willing to do this through established international norms. So let's take a look at the next map, because this shows where the ships were hit. This is a map put together by Mensch OSINT, who does an excellent job tracking this stuff, and I appreciate being able to use his maps here that show very clearly the ships that were targeted are all in the Omani Channel. They were all traveling with their AIS off. They were trying to go stealth. They're spoofing. They're jamming. They're not showing up on the tracking systems. They're trying to go dark through this area and undermine the peace agreement that was signed between Iran and the United States. So Iran asserted control with warning shots. They're not trying to sink these vessels. They're not trying to blow up the liquid natural gas carrier, which is basically a floating bomb. These are warning shots to have them turn around and go through the established route. So these, as I said before, it was a Qatari liquid natural gas tanker, a Saudi-owned very large crude carrier, and a UAE associated tanker as well in there. You can see it up at the top there. That is the UAE-owned one. So 3 parties to the conflict, 3 countries that are using their bases to attack Iran, are not following the memorandum of understanding that was signed between the 2 countries. Whether Trump says he's ripping it up in the last 2 days, I'm not going to get into that this week. We're not chasing Trump's idiotic statements all over the place. He has no idea what he's talking about, so he's not adding anything to this by saying that the MOU is dead. He just gets really upset when his forces get targeted, and these bases, every single time these bases are hit, it always takes a few days to get the satellite images. Of course, American satellite providers have blocked our access to these satellite images because of the embarrassment of these strikes. So Trump gets upset and says dumb things. We won't track that here, but we'll track what actually has gone on. If we look at the next slide, you can see the 2 warning messages. A tanker reported being hit by an unknown projectile on the port side, causing a small fire while traveling southbound. No casualties or environmental impact reported. And you can see the location of that on the map again in the Omani route, not in the north, in the Iranian route, according to the memorandum of understanding. So these are clear ceasefire violations. The Iranians have made that clear. We can see it on the next one as well. This is the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is the Royal Navy, the UK Navy's monitoring of ship traffic. So there again, you see that ship was clearly in the Omani route, and again, that's just minor structural damage, no casualties or environmental impact reported, and the vessel is continuing on its way. These are warning shots. These are not attempts to murder international sailors, merchant marines. Let's take a look at 13. These are the operations that the Iranians launched after the United States strikes. Again, every single time Iran matches. These are apparently you can tell by the propellant exhaust that these are solid fuel. These are probably Fatah 110 short-range tactical ballistic missiles with very high accuracy compared to other missiles. They're the most accurate missiles, and they're short distance. So these are the missiles that are hammering the U.S. bases in Kuwait, Qatar, and elsewhere. Although longer range ballistic missiles were fired this morning at Muwafaq al-Salti Air Base in Jordan, which is one of the major hubs. The Fatah 110s are a 500 kilogram warhead. And as I said, you could tell by the white consistent exhaust from the propellant there that we're looking at solid fuel. So you can assume that we're talking about Fatah 110s here, Fatah family, at least missiles here. These were targeting Ali Al Salam Air Base in Kuwait, Muwafaq Al Salti in Jordan, the 5th Fleet in Bahrain, and Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The United States said that they carried out 80 strikes on the first day and 90 strikes yesterday. Iran said 85 strikes in response to the first day, and we haven't seen their total for today, which they will surely respond to as well. Let's take a look at number 14, because the resistance report always likes to bring you a drone being destroyed. Done it dozens and dozens of times. This is one of 30 plus MQ-9 Reaper drones, the flagship drone of the United States Air Force, shot down. You're going to see it blown out of the sky in a moment here. They've got it on lock for a long time with a secondary reticle here from the ones, because there you see what appears to be possibly a drone that struck that. Unclear. Need to get a clearer picture of that. But again, on the way down, people who watch the resistance report know these images. They're all the same. We've seen them 30 times in Iran, 25 times in Yemen. The Israelis admitted dozens lost of these comparable drones lost in Iran, and we've watched them lose somewhere between several and many in Lebanon. 15 and 16 here just show on the ground the burn that the locals get to find, which is always double confirmation, again, looking like what we have seen from Yemen for so long as well. And then just take a look at number 17. This is the International Monetary Fund tracking transits in and out of the Gulf, in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. So on the left side, you see there is when the war is beginning, drops off to basically zero. Normally would be a rolling 7-day average. It hits around 130 transits per day, 80 of which are oil and gas. And right now we're at a fraction of that. And for most of the last several months, we've been at virtually zero exiting. And again, this is the whole strategic outcome of the Strait of Hormuz. And that is, the Iranians have the global energy market by the throat here. They have their lever of control in this region is now impacting the entire world. So the question is how long the United States want that massive gap that you see in March, April, May, and June. And you start to see it at the end of first 3 days of July, you start seeing it go up. Lloyd's of London, which is an insurance underwriter, they were talking optimistically about how more ships were traveling, were comfortable with the route and whatnot. And that just, that was blown up this week with the events this week. And Trump said that, Trump said repeatedly he doesn't want to be Herbert Hoover, who was the president that took the U.S. into the Great Depression. And he's talking about it as a global depression. Trump said previously that there was only 4 weeks of strategic petroleum reserves, and after which you'd have no oil, which I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically literally what he said. So I'm not sure this game of chicken in the Strait of Hormuz is going to benefit the United States. Again, 20 plus million barrels a day, 20% of the world's oil, and more than that of natural gas. And we have entire states, Iraq, Kuwait, they've been at zero crude output for the last 3 months. They're just beginning to dial up the first to register their first exports. Let's take a look at number 18, because this shows this is not an Iranian aligned outfit. This 𝐓𝐿 is a maritime tracker. And there you can see in the north, if you follow the north channel, you can see it works perfectly well. You go in, you go out. It follows exactly like those maps we showed, green going in, red going out. And then you see, again, people trying to sneak to the bottom one, to the southern one off Oman, you see them turning off their transponders, going dark, subterfuge to get themselves to the other side of the corridor of the strait in violation of the agreement. Lloyd's List Intelligence, these are the insurance underwriters, vessel tracking identified 33 Strait of Hormuz transits on Tuesday when this all started. But in the wake of the latest attacks, no traceable transits were recorded in the southern corridor on Wednesday. So Trump is closing his corridor by violating the MOU. It only strengthens Iran's hand. I wanted to show you these maps because this war is not going away, and these are going to be relevant understandings, foundations for how we address this conflict going forward, because all signs show that this is not going to hold up. Now, let's take a turn to Lebanon. I was away last week, so I just wanted to get up to date, tie a bow on the Lebanon front. And again, it's the maps that I've shown you from before. The area of the battle is marked here south of the Litani. That's the only significance of the red in this map, is that is the zone that this stage of the war was fought in. And I keep bringing you this map first because it just shows you the basic geography of the areas. Yahmar above Metula there, that is Beaufort Castle. And just above that is the Ali al-Tahir ridge line that overlooks Nabatea, which you can see on that map. And you can see the Galilee Panhandle up to Metula. Metula is inside what is now northern Israel. And just to point out that in the memorandum of understanding, the MOU, ensures the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. And when the MOU was signed, Trump said there must be no more attacks from Israel anywhere in Lebanon. Well, that is obviously not happening because Israel is carrying on, although at a drastically reduced level from the open war stage. They're still doing what they do everywhere, trying to achieve through ceasefire what they failed to achieve on the battlefield. Let's take a look at 21, because this security zone is establishing a security zone in an area that was ethnically cleansed, and then drawing an arbitrary line. It doesn't symbolize which battles were won, which areas are held. It's a map that is drawn inside of Israel. It's not drawn on a battlefield. But you can see they've expanded up in the north there. If you follow the white border line, the blue line between, it's white on this map, but the blue line, as it's called, between Israel and Lebanon. If you follow that up to Metula, again at the north of the Galilee Panhandle, you can follow that north to Beaufort Ridge, which is Beaufort Castle. And north of that is the Ali al-Tahir Ridge. And Israel has it on their map marked that they are in operational control of the Ali al-Tahir Ridge. We know that operational control going back to November 2023, when the Israelis started declaring it in Gaza, in places in the north where they had to go back 4 and 5 times and still haven't defeated the resistance there. They're claiming control over areas that they do not hold. But what they did do was sign a collaborationist agreement. We look at the next map. This is the map that the Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu, released, showing the agreement with the nominal Lebanese government, a collaborator agreement that allows Israel to remain with inside the territorial sovereign lines of Lebanon. Again, a violation of Memorandum of Understanding Point 1. But that is still going on. And again, Netanyahu celebrated this achievement handed to him by the Lebanese nominal government. He said, "We did not leave Lebanon. We will actually establish a security belt 10 kilometers deep inside Lebanon with the consent of the Lebanese government." So again, not a military victory, an ethnic cleansing, a targeting of civilians, and then a collaborationist, an agreement that the U.S. facilitated to leave Israeli presence inside Lebanon. in these pilot zones. Let's take a look at 23, shows these 2 pilot zones. Netanyahu has marked them there. So this is what the exchange was to the nominal Lebanese government that accepted this collaborator agreement. That these 2 tiny areas are going to be called pilot zones, and the Lebanese armed forces, who the Israelis have been killing, along with every other Lebanese job or type of people. It's an attack on civilians, and the Lebanese army are included in that. But these pilot zones, the Lebanese army will come into them, nominally will control them and disarm Hezbollah. Again, because Israel cannot defeat Hezbollah, so they're coming up with other plans outside of the battlefield through diplomacy, negotiation, collaborators to try to tilt the battlefield. And Netanyahu said about this, "I want to announce a significant achievement for the state of Israel." I mean, that's what he called the agreement with the Lebanese government. Nothing in here about defeating Hezbollah, nothing in here at all about disarming them. I mean, you have to defeat them before you can disarm them, as we know in Gaza. Didn't happen there for 3 years. It's not going to happen in Lebanon in a quarter of the time. But this is an important part too, because this goes against the Memorandum of Understanding, and Iran has been clear that they are not going to accept this. Let's look at 24, because what accepting this means is that you can see this, and I showed you these from Gaza as well. Benzion Makalas is an IDF aligned genocide supporter who makes these 3D or makes these satellite maps, which are very handy work to show the erasure of entire villages. This is Hiam between 2023 and 2026. And the Israeli defense minister, who, by the way, is a political lackey, he is not a military man, he framed it this way. According to the defense minister, in the western and central sectors of South Lebanon, there is almost 100% destruction of the villages along the line of contact, while in the eastern sector, 73% of the villages are destroyed. He says that some 600,000 Shia from villages in South Lebanon have fled, and another 7,000 have been displaced in the Dahia, in the stronghold of Beirut. Again, not a military man, not touting military victories, touting ethnic cleansing and the destruction of civilian homes as their military purpose, because they can't defeat the resistance on the battlefield, and they didn't. Just to say to our regular viewers, the way that the ceasefire came, there's actually 0 Hezbollah videos released or field reports released while I was away. So you didn't miss any breakdowns of any videos. We broke down every single video from this stage of the conflict thus far. So you're not missing anything. But let's take a look at 25, because last show I was talking to you about the Battle of Ali al-Tahrir Ridge, and the map that I just showed you where the Israelis say that they're in control of that. Hezbollah released a statement just after the ceasefire saying the Islamic resistance categorically denies what was published by the official entities belonging to the Israeli enemy army regarding control over Ali al-Tahrir Ridge on the eastern outskirts of the city of Nabatea. It confirms that the hill is free of any presence of the occupation's forces and that it remains held by the resistance fighters who exercise their control over it, and they are in full readiness to confront any attempt to advance or any incursion carried out by enemy forces. So the Israelis made a big statement. They've repeated that the Israeli soldiers are above ground and the Hezbollah fighters are underground on Ali al-Tahrir Ridge. And Hezbollah wants you to know that that is not true about the above ground. They don't speak about the underground in this. Let's take a look at 26, because this is Naim Qassem's response to this peace deal in Lebanon, and it's along with a mixtape of operations that you'll remember I broke down over the past couple of months. So the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, says, "We confronted a war aimed at eliminating the existence of Hezbollah, its environment, and its people. Through our proud and dignified people, we were able to stop this aggression. We were able to achieve a great accomplishment. We have broken the American-Israeli designs on Lebanon. Israel must withdraw unconditionally. Any commitment that undermines Lebanon's sovereignty will not pass. No normalization, no ending the state of hostility, no gains for Israel, no presence on Israeli territory. No presence on Lebanese territory by the Israelis. The resistance continues in its existence, in its presence, in its doctrine, and in its capabilities. Today, it is the pillar of Lebanon's independence and liberation, and it will remain so. So it is this people, this land, and the past, the present, and the future. We will continue to uphold the slogan, "Far be it for us to accept humiliation," or maybe a paraphrase, humiliation is not in our lexicon, as we have seen before. And these statements by Hezbollah have been very clear on this. And of course, they would be, because they have said that they're fighting an existential battle for every inch of territory of Lebanon, and that territory will be liberated. And they have promised that before and delivered it multiple times. So this has been the Resistance Report on day 1007 of Israel's genocide in Gaza.
Thank you, Jon. Oof, my God, it's just relentless. I mean, just, looking at the way that the U.S. and Israel is just ignoring, any agreement that they have signed, either with Iran or some sort of fraudulent ceasefire again with Lebanon. It's the belligerence there, and the assumption that the people on the ground, those resisting, will just stop, will just roll over and let Israel do what it wants. It's just
with no record of that, not even in a single battle, let alone
what's the definition of insanity again? Yeah,
exactly.
Just remarkable. So thank you for that. All right, Ali, did you have any comments on Jon's report?
Well, it just it just kind of completed the picture of the discussion with Helena, that it's really hard to see what the Americans think they're going to gain from provoking Iran again and violating the agreement. It's just going to backfire on them.
Yeah,
they're going to have to choose Israel or collapse of the global economy, and I guess that'll be their really difficult decision for some of them, I guess.
Imagine.
Perhaps not.
Yeah. All right. Thank you again, Jon. We're going to let you go, and then you'll come back. Ali and I are going to talk a little bit about an article that you wrote and published just in the last couple days. Sorry, my cat is in the background. So you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman, here with my colleague, Ali Abunimah. The Committee to Protect Journalists is one of the world's most prominent press freedom organizations, but a new Electronic Intifada investigation by my colleague, Ali Abunimah, reveals that CPJ is in turmoil over how it counts Palestinian journalists killed by Israel in Gaza, and over who it considers to be a journalist in the first place. There are two connected issues here that Ali points out. First, CPJ quietly changed the public wording of its definition of a journalist in 2025. The older definition explicitly said CPJ takes up cases involving staff journalists and freelancers. The new wording adds that journalists must regularly cover news or comment on public affairs, and must do so to share, quote, fact-based information with an audience. Current and former CPJ insiders say that narrows CPJ's mandate without public notice or debate. And secondly, internal board emails seen by the Electronic Intifada show that CPJ board chair Jacob Weisberg launched a renewed effort in June 2026, just last month, to revisit who is a journalist. And that effort considered excluding journalists linked to alleged state-backed propaganda or terror-affiliated organizations, disinformation, or certain unspecified behaviors and activities. And all of this was happening as Israel and its supporters were attacking CPJ's database of journalists killed in Gaza. CPJ has now confirmed to the Electronic Intifada that it is reconsidering the status of at least 4 Palestinians it had removed from that database as not journalists or media workers, despite public evidence identifying them as journalists, photographers, or media workers. Ali, this is a major story, and there are several layers to it. Let's start with the headline finding CPJ is now reconsidering the removal of killed Gaza journalists from its database. And so walk us through this. What exactly did CPJ confirm to you?
Thanks a lot, Nora. Yes, CPJ confirmed that at least 4 cases are now under review. Ahmed Fatima, Mohammed al-𝐄𝐥𝐜𝐿, Asad Shamlakh, and Mohammed Abu Matar. These are 4 Palestinians who had been removed from CPJ's public Gaza casualty records after CPJ claimed they were, quote, not journalists or media workers. And, you know, that caused a lot of upset to people because Israel, as we'll talk about, has been trying to discredit the database and discredit and dehumanize Palestinian journalists. But when we asked CPJ for evidence of why they had removed these 4 individuals, CPJ told us that it is now re-examining whether they should be included as media workers, and that all 4 of these cases are under review after they've already been removed from the database. So it seems that CPJ is reconsidering them.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those 4 cases. Who were they? Who and why do the removals raise serious questions?
Yeah. So these 4 are among 20 people that CPJ says it has removed from its database for various reasons. And some of those removals are clearly legitimate. For example, in a couple of cases, they discovered that the person was still alive. So obviously, they should not be in a database of people who are killed. And of course, in every database, there can be mistakes. And when you discover mistakes, you correct them. That's not controversial at all. There have been cases also where they claim or they assert evidence that the people were actually military combatants at the time they were killed. Well, if that's the case, then you might remove them. But it's important to point out that these are marginal. These are very few cases. And what's concerning is the bigger issue of redefining people who are journalists or media workers as not being so. And so with these cases, just to emphasize 2 of them, Ahmed Fatima, who was removed from the database, worked with Press House Palestine, a well-known Gaza media nonprofit, and Mohammed al-𝐄𝐥𝐜𝐿 also worked there. He was the personal assistant of Bilal Jadallah, who is the founder and director of Press House Palestine, who was also murdered by Israel in the first weeks of the genocide. In a profile of Press House Palestine that The Guardian published in June 2024, it described Ahmed Fatima and indeed Mohammed al-𝐄𝐥𝐜𝐿 as being part of a small group that stayed behind at Press House during the first days of the genocide, despite the danger they faced as Israel began its massive bombardment. And it said that they stayed behind because they were so dedicated to their work there. The Guardian also reported that when Mohammed al-𝐄𝐥𝐜𝐿 was pulled from the rubble, his Press House flak jacket and press card were placed on top of his body. There's actually, there was video that circulated of that online that I included in my article. And there you see the photo of Mohammed al-𝐄𝐥𝐜𝐿. I was in touch with Press House board member 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 when I was reporting this story. He's in Gaza. He told us that Ahmed Fatima and Mohammed al-Jaja were media workers, though not journalists in the sense of practicing journalistic work. And that's crucial because CPJ removed them as not journalists or media workers. And CPJ is clear that media workers include support staff, fixers, drivers, fundraisers, administrative staff, and so on, which is what both Ahmed Fatima and Mohammed al-Jaja were doing at Press House, very devoted workers there. And 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 had publicly paid tribute to them, along with Bilal Jadallah, the director, in a speech he gave to an award ceremony in Italy online. That Press House received. So their colleagues recognized them as media workers. And for Asad Shamlakh, the International Federation of Journalists, citing the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, identified him as a freelance journalist killed with his family in an Israeli airstrike. The IFG also identified Muhammad Abu Matar as a journalist, and Wafa, the Palestinian news agency, reported that he was a freelance photographer working with international agencies and covering Israeli military operations when he was killed. So that's the public reporting on these individuals who were removed from the database.
Yeah. And you followed up with CPJ on this, and in its response to you, CPJ said that some of these removals happened before the 2025 definition change. Why are insiders so worried about that change in the definition of who is a journalist?
Well, because this is a much bigger issue than just these 4 cases. These are just examples of what can happen. And the whistleblowers say that these removals show how CPJ's posture is changing, even if they happened before that surreptitious 2025 definition change. And the whistleblowers who we're in contact with argue that CPJ quietly changed its public definition of who is a journalist in 2025, adding qualifiers like regularly, fact-based information and audience, and removing the explicit sentence, "We take up cases involving staff journalists and freelancers." You can see there the archived page on the Wayback Machine of the definition before CPJ changed it without notice in 2025. And the concern of these insiders is that these qualifiers that they added give CPJ more room to exclude freelancers, irregular contributors, and people who just recently took up media work, or people working in wartime conditions and reporting with their phones or just whatever they have. And those are exactly the kinds of people who have documented Israel's genocide. Much of what the world knows from Gaza has come from irregular, freelance, and non-staff Palestinian journalists and media workers. Some of our own contributors and friends became journalists because of the genocide. It was a necessity in order to show the world what they were doing.
Yeah. And Ali, you are also given access to some internal CPJ board emails. You reveal what they say. What do those emails show?
That's right. And it's important to say that the emails and other information we received shows that this process is being driven from the top, from the board. It's not something that the experts, the specialized staff, the regional staff are asking for. It's being driven from the top. And so emails that we gained access to, or we were able to see, showed a renewed push from the board just in recent weeks in June to revisit or reopen the question of who is a journalist. So, for example, on the 9th of June, CPJ board chair Jacob Weisberg wrote that the board was working on a process to consider or reconsider the current definition and, quote, assess what changes we might make. Weisberg specifically said the process would explore excluding or including journalists working for what he called state-backed propaganda outlets, militant, and designated terror-affiliated organizations, and people whose actions, behaviors, or activities might exclude them as journalists, CPJ would document or support. And then 2 weeks later, on June 25th, Weisberg wrote to his board colleagues that a special task force had been established to re-examine who is a journalist, and this was, quote, not limited to Gaza. He said it would address journalists affiliated with non-military wings of identified terrorist organizations, as he calls them, and journalists engaged in official propaganda or misinformation. And you can see that this is an explicitly politically loaded framework. In the Palestinian context, it's obvious how dangerous it is. Israel routinely smears Palestinian journalists as terrorists or propagandists. And of course, if CPJ is now going to abide by government definitions of who is a terrorist or who is a disinformation agent, they're basically surrendering any independence or credibility they have to Western governments for which we know these designations are entirely political and not based on any objective criteria.
That's right. And it gives cover to Israel saying that they don't target journalists, right? When more than 260 Palestinian journalists and media workers have been hunted and assassinated by Israel during the last almost 3 years. On July 1st, CPJ publicly said that its board voted to affirm its existing definition of a journalist. Why do whistleblowers say that that statement was misleading?
Yeah. Well, that statement, which came on just over a week ago on July 1st, really shows that CPJ has been feeling the pressure. And so it backed off this latest attempt, spearheaded by Jacob Weisberg, to narrow the definition in a way that would exclude even more Palestinian journalists. The whistleblowers we talked to say the statement is misleading because, as I've mentioned, CPJ had already changed the wording in 2025, but without announcing it to anyone. And CPJ acknowledged to us that the public wording was changed on its website in June 2025. It also confirmed that when the board said it was affirming the existing definition, that meant the changed wording that was changed last year, not the wording that the insiders say was more flexible and inclusive and that had been CPJ's definition for a very long time. For its part, CPJ insists that the change in the wording that took place in 2025 is just a clarification, and they say it doesn't narrow their mandate in any way. The insiders dispute that, and they say the public was being told with this recent statement that nothing changed when in fact the public definition had changed.
Right. Very clever. You said that CPJ backed off and issued that statement on July 1st because of public pressure. Where was that pressure coming from?
Well, it was coming from a number of directions, but it really exploded when CPJ board member Nika Soon-Shiong went public. Soon-Shiong happens to be the publisher of Dropsite News, and on June 29th, she posted publicly that she had been informed she was no longer a member of the CPJ board. Effectively, she was indicating that she had been removed from the board for her dissenting views. She had sent an email to the board just the day before that post, warning that reopening the question of who is a journalist would be a betrayal of colleagues in Gaza facing the deadliest conflict for journalists ever recorded. She was responding to that renewed push spearheaded by the board chair, Jacob Weisberg, to potentially exclude even more Palestinians. She wrote that CPJ's mandate is strongest when it protects journalists regardless of political viewpoint or who their employer is. The timing is very striking. She had asked for a board vote on any further changes. She challenged the direction the process was taking and then was abruptly told that her board service had ended.
Oh, amazing. And of course, CPJ is denying that pressure from Israel or its supporters influenced the Gaza database review in the first place. But your article, Ali, shows that Israel is celebrating the review. How should we understand that?
Yeah. So, of course, I think regular viewers understand how Israel's propaganda tactics work. Israel's goal is not necessarily to disprove that every single one of the more than 200 journalists they've murdered, that they weren't journalists. Its goal is just to create doubt around the whole database by smearing at least some of the journalists it's murdered as quote unquote terrorists. And you can see that this disturbing tweet from the Israeli military doing just that and gloating over CPJ's review of its Gaza database. And you can see the Israel Defense Forces tweeting at CPJ, "We hate to be the ones who told you so." And then there's a meme there of SpongeBob, cartoon character looking anguished. And the caption is, "The CPJ after finding out that the journalists on their list are actually terrorists." So there is the Israeli army saying it out openly that we're not killing journalists, we're killing terrorists. And critics of what the CPJ is doing by redefining who is a journalist and by reviewing every person in the Gaza database, they feel that CPJ is playing into this propaganda and handing Israel talking points. Recall, Nora, that Israel has killed an unprecedented number of Palestinian journalists and media workers during this genocide. And that fact is politically devastating for Israel. And as you mentioned, CPJ denies that the pressure that the political pressure they have been under and are under is responsible for its reviews, but the context is unavoidable. Israel and pro-Israel outlets have been attacking the Committee to Protect Journalists' documentation of Israel's crimes in Gaza, and the Israeli military is publicly gloating that CPJ is now reviewing its database.
Right.
I'll just say also, I think it's worth mentioning that even though CPJ is denying that any pressure is involved, we've reported on this type of pressure previously. In December, our colleague Abu Bakr Abed reported on whistleblower concerns that CPJ was bowing to pressure from pro-Israel donors, and you can see his article there, and the picture there is of Jody Ginsburg, the CEO of CPJ. And in February, I reported on concerns or allegations that CPJ had scrapped its annual impunity index effectively to shield Israel, because Israel would have shot to the top of that index and remained there for years to come. But as I said, CPJ denies that this type of pressure is a factor. I'll also say that a lot of the hostile articles in the pro-Israel media particularly attacked Nika Soon-Shong and Dropsite News for their coverage of the genocide in Gaza. So it might be hard to believe, and you see there an example from the Washington Free Beacon, a right-wing pro-Israel outlet. So it's a strange coincidence that she was removed from the board in the context of all these attacks focusing on her. And so that in sum is why insiders see these reviews being carried out by CPJ as capitulating to Israel's agenda. They say the Committee to Protect Journalists should focus on accountability, on getting accountability for journalists murdered and for the war crimes Israel is committing, not allowing Israel to dictate what evidence CPJ tracks down, or playing defense and going through its database to effectively put murdered journalists on trial after they've been killed.
It's so sick. And, we've reported regularly on how Israel openly hunts, threatens, targets journalists and media workers while they're doing their job or while they're sleeping at home with their family or in a displacement tent. so Palestinian journalists are already, as you mentioned, as said, already in constant danger for just doing their work. But what is the broader danger here for Palestinian journalists in the context of what CPJ is doing?
Well, the additional danger, because they face so many, is that the world's leading press freedom organization has started to adopt frameworks that mirror the accusations of the state or entity that is killing all these journalists. If Israel can kill Palestinian journalists, smear them afterwards, and then pressure institutions like CPJ to remove or downgrade them, that is a form of retroactive justification for those killings. And that is the view of the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate, which has condemned this campaign to smear Palestinian journalists and media workers murdered in the genocide. And the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate issued a statement last week which condemns what it calls a systematic campaign promoted from Israel, seeking to cast doubt on the professional status of martyred Palestinian journalists in a blatant attempt to justify the crimes committed against them. And the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate expressed its absolute rejection of any external intervention in classifying Palestinian journalists or questioning their professional status, including anything issued by the Committee to Protect Journalists. So that the Palestinian Journalists Union, the main Palestinian Journalists Union, is specifically calling out the Committee to Protect Journalists here. And this also affects journalists who are still trying to report from Gaza.
Yeah.
If CPJ narrows its definition in ways that exclude freelancers, media workers, or people affiliated with outlets Israel or Western governments dislike, then fewer Palestinian journalists will be recognized and protected at precisely this moment when they are most vulnerable and still being killed. And this has impacts beyond Gaza. As Jacob Weisberg said in his email, this is not just about Gaza. It starts with Gaza always, and then it moves out from there. And potentially any government that jails or kills journalists can then claim they're propagandists, terrorists, foreign agents, disinformation actors, whatever. CPJ historically understood that danger. That's why it's so controversial and serious that they are starting to succumb to these government and Israeli agendas.
Where to even start with the hypocrisy and I mean, Ali, what should people be watching for next? Where does this go? What is most important to keep abreast of right now?
Yeah, well, as far as CPJ is concerned, it's said that its review will be finalized and published soon, and we need to see whether these 4 Palestinians are restored to the database and on what basis, and if they remove anyone else and on what basis. And second, we need to watch what CPJ does with that definition, not because CPJ is some world authority on who is a journalist, but it's a signal on who they are caving into if they shift that definition again. They backed off from the effort for now, facing public pressure, but I don't think Israel and its lobby will give up there, and the pressure on them will continue. Will they continue to resist it? And so that's what we need to watch for. And as I mentioned, the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate has already condemned efforts to smear Palestinian journalists and rejected attempts to narrow who qualifies as a journalist. So we really need to take a lead from Palestinians in Palestine, particularly in Gaza. The issue is very simple. Israel is killing journalists in Gaza at a scale the world has never seen. The role of a press freedom organization should be to defend them and demand accountability, not to help Israel cast doubt on the people it has killed.
Indeed. And again, Ali, your article is called Exclusive, CPJ Reconsidering Removal of Killed Gaza Journalists from Database. And that's at the Electronic Intifada at electronicintifada.net, and we'll also link it in the live stream notes. And of course, we'll continue following CPJ's review and any further response from Palestinian journalists and advocates of true press freedom. Thank you so much, Ali, for digging into this. And I know we'll have more to update soon, I'm sure. Oh my gosh. All right. Let's, on that note, let's take a look at the website. Should we invite Jon back to the table? Hello, Jon.
Let's
Anything
have
you want
Jon
to say
back
on protecting Palestinian journalists right now?
No, I was
Well,
just
one
saying
thing, sorry
your
to
invitation.
interrupt, but all of this also goes for Lebanese journalists
That's
too,
right.
who are being murdered by Israel
Yeah.
at an horrific
Bombed
rate.
on camera.
Yeah.
Serially. Yeah, it's horrific. It's horrific. And now is the time to keep working shoulder to shoulder with our colleagues, or in West Asia, who are bearing the brunt of this kind of barbarity. So yeah, that's our job as well. Let's take a look at the website. We've published so many features and news reports. Once again, there's our colleague Dave Cronin's latest about the EU. Envoy cites CIA as EU helps Israel to tighten grip on Jerusalem. That, I think, was just published before airtime, so I haven't read it yet. But
I have. It's a great
Yeah.
piece. Again, David Cronin working magic with the freedom of information requests and exposing the things about the European Union that they don't want us to know. And a point he makes is that the EU presents itself as more, in some ways more moderate and reasonable and more supportive of Palestinians than say the United States. But what he shows is when you dig in, actually in many ways even just as or even more hardline or pro-Israeli, and that's what this piece highlights again.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And we have many news reports and features. Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor at the Electronic Intifada, wrote a blistering analysis of the recent UN Commission's report on Israel's deliberate targeting of children in Gaza. Her piece, "Why Gaza is the world's most dangerous place for children," is really imperative read, I think, for our readers.
It's so important. This was so helpful and useful for me, and there are really moving photos throughout the piece as well. It was so helpful for me because that report came out, this UN Commissioning of Inquiry report, as I was traveling, and I did not have time. I tried to read these UN reports, but sometimes they're very thick. So Maureen just did an incredible job of really providing the essentials and some analysis. So I strongly recommend that piece.
Yeah, it's a tough one to get through, obviously, but it's really important. And then we have a bunch of features from our writers in Gaza, of course. And
I bet you'll be reading from the piece from Mohammed Al-Qarshali next week. It's such a moving piece. And
yes.
Again, so much about how for us who we may have visited Gaza, we may never have been there, but we're not from Gaza.
Yeah.
For us, we see the current images of Gaza as a destroyed place. And for our writers in Gaza, they see and experience Gaza not just as it is now, but as it was. And so this piece to me is very much about, not just about the present reality, but also that memory of what Gaza was and what it could be again.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I will hopefully be able to read from it next week. That's Return to Al-Wahda Tower by Khaled Al-Kershali. You can read that and so many more at electronicintifada.net. Of course, Ali, to keep this publication, this live stream, all of this media going, who do we have to thank this week?
Well, we have, as I pull up my list, we have a very long list of incredible people who help us. People support us in so many ways, and I think that can't be said enough. People write us lovely notes and comments that we read. We can't always reply to everyone, at least not in a super timely way. I do try, as I've said before, and sometimes, there's people out there, you'll receive a reply from me 3 months later, sometimes 6 months, but I read everything. And we see the comments of people watching the live stream, people watch the segments afterwards on social media. It's so important to share the work that we're producing, to like and share the segments, but also those articles from our colleagues in Gaza that describe a reality that is not being reported outside of independent media like the Electronic Intifada. Very few places are continuing to be there every single day for Gaza, for Palestine. And we are honored to be a platform for our writers, for our colleagues in Gaza, and to continue to support them. And we support them because of you. So, and everything we do, all the work we do is funded and supported by our viewers, listeners, and readers. So you can become one of them if you have some extra money. You want to give it to a good cause. There are many good causes, and we hope we're one of them. Go to electronicintifada.net and click donate now, or there are links in the YouTube video description. And some of those who've done that in the last week or so since our last show include Julian, Christina, Douglas, Adam, Zafar, David, Gary, Scott, Harriet, Uthman, and I want to mention a few people who are making monthly donations, which is a great way to support us because it gives us predictability and stability. And you can do that too at electronicintifada.net. Jane, Ardashir, Sana, Sabrina, Jitendra, Peter, and Greg. Thank you all to you and to every other person out there who makes all this work possible. We can't do it without you.
Thank you all. And of course, I want to thank Tamara Nassar, our director and producer. Thank you so much, Tamara, for everything you do. Thanks to Ellie Gerzon for social media production. Thanks to Pierre Loisel for radio production. Thank you to all of our colleagues at the Electronic Intifada. And on behalf of myself, John, Ali, and Tamara, thank you all, and we will see you next week.